You want to play? He locked the door and changed the rules.
The moment Elena Ward turned the handle to Victor Hale's bedroom door, she knew her carefully rebuilt life was about to shatter. For 9 years, she'd run from the dangerous pull between them, the forbidden heat that had nearly destroyed her brother's trust and her own sanity. Now, at midnight in his private wing, she stood frozen as Victor's steel-gray eyes locked onto hers with recognition that burned through every defense she'd constructed. When he reached past her shoulder and turned the lock with a deliberate click, the sound echoed like a verdict. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If you're ready to discover whether love can survive 9 years of restraint, betrayal, and the deadly world of Chicago's underworld, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Elena and Victor's story reaches across the world. The manila folder trembled slightly in Elena's grip as she navigated the dimly lit corridors of the Hale Estate's East Wing. It was past midnight, the time Lucas had specified when he'd asked her to deliver the quarterly report directly to Victor's private quarters. A simple errand. In and out. No complications. She should have known better. Nothing involving Victor Hale had ever been simple. The East Wing felt different from the rest of the sprawling Chicago mansion, quieter, more intimate, stripped of the cold grandeur that characterized the public spaces where Victor conducted his business. Here, the hardwood floors gleamed beneath subdued lighting, and the air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with old books and leather. Elena's heels clicked softly against the floor as she approached the double doors at the end of the hallway. "The study," Lucas had said. "Leave it on his desk if he's not there." She'd nodded, relieved at the possibility of avoiding a face-to-face encounter entirely. 3 days back in Chicago, and she'd already seen Victor twice, both times from a careful distance, both times feeling the weight of his attention like a physical touch across crowded rooms. She'd perfected the art of strategic absence over the past 72 hours, accepting her brother's offer to work as his executive assistant while maintaining elaborate schemes to ensure she and Victor occupied different spaces at different times. It had almost worked. Elena paused outside the study doors, pressing her ear close to listen for signs of occupation. Silence. She exhaled slowly, then turned the handle and slipped inside. The study was empty, as hoped. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, while a third showcased a collection of art that would make museums weep, pieces Victor had acquired through methods Elena preferred not to examine too closely. His desk commanded the center of the room, all dark wood and organized chaos, illuminated by a single lamp that cast long shadows across scattered papers. She crossed quickly to the desk, setting the folder down precisely in its center where he couldn't miss it. Mission accomplished. Time to leave. Elena turned toward the exit and froze. She'd entered through the wrong door. What she'd assumed was Victor's study was actually a sitting room. She could see now the subtle differences, the more personal touches, the doorway leading deeper into what could only be his private bedroom. Her pulse quickened as she realized her mistake, even as her treacherous gaze drifted toward that open doorway. Don't look, just leave. But she'd always been terrible at following her own good advice. Through the doorway, she could see the edge of a massive bed, sheets dark and rumpled as though recently vacated. A book lay face down on the nightstand. The soft glow of another lamp suggested someone had just been there, had just stepped away for a moment, might return at any second. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she backed toward what she hoped was the exit. Her hand found a door handle. She turned it, pulled, and stepped directly into Victor Hale's bedroom. The actual bedroom, not the sitting room. His most private space, the inner sanctum where no one was permitted without explicit invitation. The place where Chicago's most feared crime boss was supposed to be untouchable, unreachable, safe from intrusion. She'd walked right into it. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she registered her surroundings in one terrible sweep. The enormous bed dominated the space, its dark navy sheets twisted as though someone had left it hastily. Personal items scattered across surfaces, a watch, cufflinks, a glass of whiskey half finished on the dresser. The room smelled like him, that intoxicating combination of danger and discipline that had haunted her dreams for 9 years. Run, now. She spun back toward the door she'd just entered through, her fingers already reaching for the handle when another door, one she hadn't even noticed, swung open across the room. Victor stepped through, a towel wrapped low around his hips and water still glistening on his bare shoulders from what was clearly a recent shower. His dark hair was damp, pushed back from his face in a way that made him look younger than his 34 years, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. They both stopped moving. The distance between them couldn't have been more than 15 feet, but it felt simultaneously like miles and inches. Elena's mind went blank, her carefully prepared excuses evaporating as Victor's gray eyes widened in recognition, then darkened with something far more dangerous than surprise. "Elena." Her name came out rough, almost strangled. "What are you doing here?" Her voice failed completely. She tried again. "Lucas sent me. To deliver a report. I thought this was the study. The door was unlocked. I didn't mean to—" "You're in my bedroom." He said it quietly, stating a fact that needed no emphasis. His gaze swept over her in a way that made her skin burn, taking in her professional pencil skirt and silk blouse, the folder still clutched against her chest like a shield. "At midnight. I was leaving. I am leaving." Elena turned back to the door, her hand closing around the cool metal of the handle. "That's not the exit." She froze, looking at the door more closely. He was right. It was a closet door, not a hallway exit. Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized just how thoroughly she'd become disoriented. "Other side of the room," Victor continued, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite identify. "Behind you." Elena turned slowly, carefully keeping her gaze away from where he stood in nothing but that towel. She could see the proper exit now, could calculate the exact path she'd need to take to reach it, except that path would require walking directly past Victor, close enough to touch, close enough to smell the soap on his skin and feel the heat radiating from his body. Some analytical part of her brain noted that he wasn't moving to accommodate her escape. He stood perfectly still in the doorway of what was clearly an ensuite bathroom, watching her with an intensity that made her feel like prey caught in a predator's sights. "I should go." She forced the words out, forced her feet to move, one step and then another toward the exit that seemed to grow farther away with each inch she covered. "You should," Victor agreed. But then he moved too, not away, but toward her, closing the distance between them with deliberate steps. "You've been back for 3 days. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes. And you've been avoiding me." "I've been busy." "Don't." The single word cut through her excuse like a blade. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you haven't been orchestrating our schedules to ensure we're never in the same room together. You leave meetings 5 minutes before I arrive. You take lunch at odd hours. Yesterday, you actually hid in the ladies' room when you saw me coming down the hallway." Elena's cheeks burned hotter. She hadn't realized he'd noticed that particular tactical retreat. "I wasn't hiding. I had to—" "Why did you come back?" Victor cut her off again, and now he was close enough that she could see the water droplets still clinging to his collarbone, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "After 9 years, why did you come back to Chicago?" "Lucas needed help with—" "Lucas has a staff of 40. Try again." The folder slipped from Elena's fingers, landing on the floor between them with a soft thud that neither of them acknowledged. Her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of his proximity, and the question she'd been asking herself every day since she'd boarded the plane back home. "I missed my brother," she said, lifting her chin in defiance. "Is that so hard to believe?" "No." Victor's hand came up, and for one breathless moment Elena thought he might touch her face. Instead, his fingers curled into a fist and dropped back to his side. "What's hard to believe is that you'd put yourself through this, through being close to me again, just for Lucas. You don't know what I would do for my brother. I know exactly what you'd do for your brother." Something sharp flashed through Victor's expression, old pain mixing with fresh anger. "You'd leave behind everything you wanted. You'd build a life 2,000 miles away. You'd stay gone for 9 years without a single visit, without a single phone call that wasn't carefully scheduled when you knew I wouldn't be around. Victor, you'd sacrifice your own happiness to keep his trust." He took another step closer, close enough now that Elena could feel the heat of his skin, could see the way his jaw clenched with restraint. "So I'll ask you again, Elena. Why did you really come back?" The truth lodged in her throat, too dangerous to voice, too persistent to swallow. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore. Because 9 years of distance didn't make this disappear. Because I'm tired of running from something that feels inevitable." "It doesn't matter," she whispered instead. Nothing has changed. Lucas trusts you with his business. He trusts you with his life. But he made it clear 9 years ago what would happen if we ever what? Victor's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, rough and raw and utterly compelling. Say it, Elena. Finish the sentence. You know what? I want to hear you say it. Elena's breath came faster as she met his gaze, those steel gray eyes that had haunted her across years and miles and countless attempts to forget. If we ever crossed the line, if we ever acted on this, she gestured helplessly between them, unable to name the thing that had been simmering for nearly a decade. He would never forgive either of us. You'd lose your best friend and second in command. I'd lose my brother. And what about what you'd gain? The question hung between them, heavy with implication and promise and threat all woven together. Elena shook her head, stepping back even as every cell in her body screamed at her to step forward instead. There's nothing to gain, she said, hating how her voice shook. Just everything to lose. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really believe that? After all this time, you still think this? He moved suddenly, closing the distance she'd created until they were nearly chest to chest. Is nothing? I didn't say it was nothing. Elena's back hit the wall she hadn't realized was behind her, trapping her between expensive wallpaper and Victor's overwhelming presence. I said there's nothing to gain from acting on it. Liar. The word should have offended her. Instead, it sent electricity racing down her spine, igniting nerves she'd thought she'd successfully numbed over 9 years of deliberate distance. You need to let me leave. She tried to sound firm, commanding, in control. Instead, she sounded breathless and desperate and utterly unconvincing. The door's unlocked. Victor braced one hand against the wall beside her head, his body creating a cage she could easily escape if she wanted to. They both knew she didn't want to. You can walk out any time. Then why aren't you moving? Because maybe I'm tired of being the only one who exercises restraint. His free hand came up, fingers threading through her dark hair, in a gesture so achingly familiar that Elena's eyes fluttered closed, despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain her guard. Maybe I'm tired of watching you pretend this doesn't exist. That we don't exist. We don't exist, Elena forced out, even as she felt herself leaning into his touch like a flower seeking sunlight after a long winter. We never existed. We were just a moment. A mistake that almost happened. A mistake. Victor's thumb brushed against her cheekbone, tracing the bone structure with reverence that contradicted his harsh tone. Is that what you call it? The best thing that almost happened to both of us? The worst thing. But her hands betrayed her, coming up to rest against his bare chest where she could feel his heart racing as fast as her own. It would have destroyed everything. It already destroyed everything. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the minimal space between their mouths. Do you have any idea what the last 9 years have been like? Do you know how many times I've picked up the phone to call you, only to remember that you left specifically to get away from me? Not from you. The confession escaped before she could stop it. From this, from wanting something I couldn't have. And now? Victor's voice had gone dangerously soft, his thumb still tracing patterns on her skin that made coherent thought nearly impossible. Now that you're back, now that we're here in my bedroom at midnight with no one to interrupt us, no one to save us from ourselves, what do you want now? Elena opened her eyes to find him staring at her with an intensity that stole what little remained of her breath. This close, she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow from a fight when he was 17. Could count the different shades of gray in his eyes, slate and steel and storm clouds all woven together. Could trace the sharp line of his jaw and the way his pulse hammered in his throat, visible proof that he was just as affected as she was. I want... The word stuck, too honest and too dangerous. She tried again. I want what I've always wanted, for this to not matter, for the wanting to stop. That's not going to happen. I know. The admission seemed to break something in both of them. Victor's hand tightened in her hair, tilting her head back further, and Elena's fingers curled against his chest, nails digging into skin she'd dreamed about touching for far too long. Tell me to leave, she whispered. Tell me to walk out that door and never come back. No? Victor, 9 years ago, I let you go because Lucas asked me to. Because you were 21, and I was 25, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Give you space to grow up, to build a life, to figure out what you wanted without my influence. His voice had gone rough with emotion, each word seeming to cost him something. I told myself it was temporary, that you'd come back when you were ready, when enough time had passed that Lucas would understand. I waited, Elena. I stayed out of relationships that meant anything. I kept myself available for a future that you seemed determined never to let happen. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Elena's breath hitched audibly. But I'm done pretending. I'm done exercising restraint and doing the right thing, and respecting boundaries that only exist because we're both too scared to challenge them. I'm not scared. The lie was automatic, defensive. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yes, you are. You're terrified. Of this? Of me. Of what happens if we stop fighting and just let ourselves feel what we've been feeling since you were 19 years old and looked at me across a crowded room like I was the answer to a question you'd been too afraid to ask. The memory slammed into Elena with physical force, that charity gala where she'd been home from her sophomore year of college, where she'd seen Victor standing with her brother and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The moment their eyes had met across the distance and something fundamental had changed in her understanding of desire, of wanting, of what it meant to crave something you couldn't have. That was a long time ago, she managed. It was 9 years ago, and nothing has changed except that we're both older now, both supposedly wiser, both supposedly better at controlling ourselves. Victor's hand slid from her hair to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle despite the tension coiling through every line of his body. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you don't still feel it. Elena knew she should lie, should protect them both from the consequences of honesty, should retreat behind the walls she'd spent 9 years constructing specifically to defend against this moment. Instead, she told the truth. I feel it, she whispered, her hands sliding up from his chest to his shoulders, feeling the muscles bunch beneath her touch. I've never stopped feeling it. It's why I left. It's why I stayed away so long. And it's... Her voice broke slightly. It's why I came back. The confession hung in the air between them, transforming everything and nothing all at once. Victor's eyes darkened to almost black, his fingers tightening against her face as his gaze dropped to her mouth. Elena. Her name sounded like a prayer and a curse intertwined. If you want me to stop, you need to say it now, because in about 5 seconds I'm going to kiss you, and once I start, I don't think I'll be able to stop. She should say it, should push him away and run for that door and never look back, should protect her relationship with Lucas, should preserve the careful balance that kept Chicago's underworld functioning smoothly, should do literally anything except what she did next. Elena rose onto her toes, eliminating what little distance remained between them, and whispered against his lips, "Then don't stop." Victor's control shattered. His mouth claimed hers with 9 years of pent-up hunger and restraint unleashed all at once. There was nothing gentle about it, nothing tentative or exploratory. This was desperation given physical form, want transformed into action, the culmination of nearly a decade of denial finally breaking free. Elena gasped against his mouth, and Victor took advantage, deepening the kiss until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. His hands were in her hair, on her face, sliding down to her waist to pull her flush against him. Her own hands traced the muscled planes of his back, mapping territory she'd only imagined, discovering that reality was so much better than fantasy. This was what she'd run from, this overwhelming, consuming, absolutely terrifying connection that made everything else fade into insignificance. When Victor kissed her, Chicago disappeared. Her brother disappeared. Consequences and logic and self-preservation all evaporated, leaving only this, his mouth on hers, his body pressed against her, the feeling that she'd finally come home after years of wandering. We shouldn't... Elena tried to inject reason between kisses, even as her body arched into his touch. We can't... Stop talking. Victor's mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, trailing fire down the column of her throat. For once in your life, Elena, stop thinking and just feel. So she did. She let herself feel the silk of his damp hair between her fingers, the roughness of his stubble against her neck, the hard planes of his body fitted against her softer curves. She let herself feel wanted and reckless and gloriously alive in a way she hadn't experienced since the last time he'd held her like this, 9 years ago in her brother's garden, under stars that had witnessed the beginning of everything and nothing all at once. A phone rang somewhere in the distance, shrill and insistent. They both ignored it. Victor's hands found the buttons of her blouse, fumbling slightly in his haste. "Tell me to stop," he demanded between kisses, even as his fingers made quick work of the first button, then the second. "Tell me this is a mistake." "It is a mistake." But Elena was already pulling at the towel around his hips, already pressing closer instead of pulling away. "The biggest mistake we could possibly make." "Then why does it feel so right?" Before she could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, heavy, approaching footsteps that sent reality crashing back with brutal force. Victor's body went rigid, his hands stilling against her partially unbuttoned blouse. They stared at each other in horror as the footsteps grew louder, closer. "Victor?" Lucas's voice carried through the door, followed by a firm knock. "You in there? We need to talk about the Martinez situation. It can't wait." Elena's heart stopped. Her brother, her protective, perceptive, would absolutely murder them, both brother, was standing less than 10 feet away while she was pressed against the wall of Victor's bedroom, her blouse half undone and her lips swollen from kisses she shouldn't have allowed. Victor moved with impressive speed, stepping back and grabbing a shirt from a nearby chair in one fluid motion. His eyes met Elena's with an intensity that promised this wasn't over, that they would finish this conversation even if the universe seemed determined to interrupt. "Give me 2 minutes," Victor called back, his voice remarkably steady given that he'd been seconds away from... Elena cut that thought off sharply. "I'll meet you in the study." "Everything okay?" "Fine. 2 minutes." The footsteps retreated, and Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands shook as she started rebuttoning her blouse, fingers clumsy with adrenaline and interrupted desire. "That was," she started, "too close." Victor finished pulling on his shirt, running a hand through his still damp hair in frustration. "Elena, don't." She held up a hand, needing distance and clarity, before he said something that would make leaving impossible. "This was... We got carried away. It won't happen again." "Yes, it will." He said it with absolute certainty, crossing back to her despite her defensive posture. His hand cupped her face again, thumb tracing her kiss-swollen bottom lip. "This isn't over. Whatever just happened here, whatever we just started, we're going to finish it. We can't. We will." Victor leaned down, pressing one more kiss to her forehead with devastating tenderness. "Because you didn't come back to Chicago just to run away again, and I didn't wait 9 years just to let you go without a fight. Lucas will have to understand that some things are inevitable." He stepped back, giving her space but keeping his eyes locked on hers. "Now go. Use the servant's stairs at the end of the hall. I'll distract him long enough for you to get back to the West Wing." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She moved toward the door on shaking legs, her mind still reeling from what had just happened, from what had almost happened. "Elena." Victor's voice stopped her at the threshold. She looked back to find him watching her with an expression that was equal parts promise and threat. "This isn't over," he repeated. "Not even close." She didn't respond, couldn't respond. Instead, she slipped through the door and into the dimly lit hallway, pressing one hand against her racing heart as she tried to remember how to breathe. Behind her, she heard the soft click of Victor's door closing, followed by the sound of his voice greeting her brother with easy familiarity. As if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Elena made it to the servant's stairs and down 2 flights before her legs gave out. She sank onto a step in the darkness, pressing her fingers to her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss, still taste the promise of something dangerous and inevitable and absolutely forbidden. She'd come back to Chicago telling herself it was temporary, a favor for Lucas, a brief return to tie up loose ends before heading back to her carefully constructed life in Seattle. But as she sat in the darkness with her heart still racing and her body still humming from Victor's touch, Elena finally admitted the truth she'd been hiding from for 9 years. She hadn't come back to Chicago for her brother. She'd come back for Victor. And now that she'd finally let herself feel what she'd been denying all this time, Elena had absolutely no idea how to walk away. Above her, she heard doors opening and closing, heard the murmur of male voices discussing business and territories and threats she should probably care about but couldn't focus on. Somewhere in that conversation, her brother was trusting Victor with his life, with his operation, with everything except the one thing Victor apparently wanted most, his sister. Elena closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the cool wall, letting the enormity of what she'd just done wash over her. One kiss. 9 years of restraint shattered by one kiss in a midnight encounter that should never have happened. Except it had happened. And Victor was right. This wasn't over. The real question was whether they'd survive what came next, or whether loving each other would destroy them both, along with everyone they cared about in the process. Elena sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down like a physical force. Tomorrow, she'd go back to avoiding him. Tomorrow, she'd resurrect her defenses and rebuild her walls and pretend that tonight had been an aberration, a moment of weakness that wouldn't be repeated. But tonight, alone in the servants' stairwell of a mansion that had never felt like home until Victor had pressed her against his bedroom wall and kissed her like she was air and he was drowning. Tonight, she let herself admit the truth. She was in love with Victor Hale. She'd been in love with him for 9 years. And coming back to Chicago was either the bravest thing she'd ever done or the biggest mistake of her life. Possibly both. Elena finally stood, smoothing down her skirt and checking that her blouse was properly buttoned before making her way back to her room. As she walked through the quiet hallways, she became aware of a new sensation settling into her bones alongside the lingering heat of desire. Fear. Not of Victor, never of Victor, but of what loving him would cost. Of the choice she knew was coming, the impossible decision between the man she loved and the brother who'd raised her after their parents died, who'd sacrificed everything to give her a better life. Lucas had asked only one thing of her 9 years ago: stay away from Victor. For both their sakes, he'd said. For the stability of the organization. For the preservation of the friendship and trust that kept Chicago's underworld functioning. She'd agreed because it had seemed reasonable at the time, because she'd been 21 and scared and convinced that distance would cure what she was feeling. But 9 years later, with Victor's kiss still burning on her lips and her body still aching for more, Elena finally understood what her brother had known all along. Some attractions didn't fade with distance. Some connections only grew stronger with time. And some loves were worth risking everything for, even when everything included the most important relationship in her life. The question was whether she was brave enough to take that risk, or whether fear would win, sending her running back to Seattle and another 9 years of pretending she could survive without the one man who'd ever made her feel completely, terrifyingly alive. Elena reached her room and locked the door behind her, leaning against it as exhaustion finally caught up with adrenaline. Through her window, she could see the lights of Chicago stretching out in all directions, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibility. Somewhere in this massive house, Victor was finishing his meeting with her brother, probably discussing logistics and territories and problems that needed solving. Was he thinking about her? Was he replaying those moments in his bedroom, analyzing every kiss and touch and whispered confession? Or had he already moved on, chalking it up to inevitable weakness before retreating back into the careful control he'd maintained for 9 years? Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. Her hand shook slightly as she pulled it from her pocket, breath-catching when she saw Victor's name on the screen. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. No more running." 3 sentences that changed everything and nothing. Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing her response. "I don't run." His reply came within seconds. Liar. "But I'll prove it tomorrow." "Sleep well, Elena. If you can." She threw her phone onto the bed and pressed both hands against her face, torn between laughing and crying and screaming in frustration. That insufferable, arrogant, absolutely correct man. Of course she wouldn't sleep. How could she sleep when her entire carefully ordered world had just imploded? But as Elena finally changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling while her mind refused to quiet, she couldn't quite suppress the small smile that curved her lips. Tomorrow, they would talk. Tomorrow, decisions would be made. Tomorrow, the consequences of tonight would come crashing down. But tonight, she'd let herself remember the feel of Victor's mouth on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the sound of her name spoken like a prayer by the only man she'd ever loved. It was dangerous and reckless, and probably the beginning of the end. But for the first time in 9 years, Elena Ward felt like she'd finally come home. Even if home was the most dangerous place she could possibly be. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency, sunlight cutting through Elena's curtains like an interrogation lamp. She'd managed perhaps 2 hours of fractured sleep, her dreams a confused tangle of Victor's hands in her hair and Lucas's disappointed face and locked doors that led to rooms she couldn't escape. The face staring back at her from the bathroom mirror looked exactly like someone who'd spent half the night kissing her brother's best friend and the other half catastrophizing about the consequences. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her lips still felt tender from the pressure of Victor's mouth. Elena splashed cold water on her face, trying to shock herself into some semblance of professional composure. She had exactly 45 minutes before the morning briefing, a daily ritual where Lucas gathered his key people to discuss overnight developments and plan the day's operations. Victor would be there. She would be there. And somehow, Elena would have to sit across a conference table from him and pretend the world hadn't fundamentally shifted on its axis. Her phone buzzed as she was applying concealer to the evidence of her sleepless night. Conference room, 8 a.m. Don't even think about calling in sick. No name, but she didn't need one. Victor's arrogance translated perfectly via text message. Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a dozen sharp responses forming and dissolving before she finally settled on simplicity itself. I'll be there. She arrived at the conference room at precisely 8 o'clock, having timed her entrance to coincide with the general shuffle of people finding seats and pouring coffee. Strategic camouflage among the crowd. Lucas stood at the head of the long mahogany table, reviewing notes on his tablet while his assembled team settled into their usual positions. Elena scanned the room quickly, cataloging exits and potential allies, and there, Victor sat 3 chairs down from Lucas on the right side, looking infuriatingly well-rested in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car. His attention appeared focused entirely on his own phone, scrolling through messages with the kind of casual disinterest that might have fooled anyone who didn't know him as well as Elena did. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his mouth. He was as aware of her presence as she was of his, even without looking up. "Elena, good morning." Lucas smiled at her with genuine warmth, gesturing to an empty chair. "Coffee's fresh if you need it. You look tired." "Couldn't sleep," she said truthfully, sliding into the indicated seat, which happened to be directly across from Victor. Of course it was. The universe apparently had a twisted sense of humor. "New city sounds, I guess." "You lived here for 21 years, Lucas pointed out with brotherly amusement. "Pretty sure you know all the sounds already." "Maybe I forgot." Elena reached for the coffee carafe, concentrating on the simple mechanics of pouring and adding cream to avoid looking at the man across from her. "Funny how we forget things when we're away too long," Victor said quietly, his first words since she'd entered the room, "and how clearly we remember others." Elena's hand jerked slightly, sending a small splash of coffee over the rim of her cup. She grabbed a napkin, blotting at the spill while fury and embarrassment warred in her chest. He was baiting her, in front of everyone, in front of Lucas. "Memories can be unreliable," she replied coolly, finally meeting his gaze across the polished wood. "We tend to romanticize the past, make it better or worse than it actually was." "I don't romanticize." Victor's gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. "I remember exactly how things were. Every detail. Every moment." The air between them thickened with tension that had nothing to do with the business meeting about to commence. Elena became hyper-aware of the other people in the room. Marcus, Lucas's head of security, reviewing something on his laptop. Jennifer, the logistics coordinator, scrolling through her phone. 2 junior associates whose names Elena hadn't yet learned, looking bored and slightly hungover. No one seemed to notice the silent war being waged across the conference table. "All right, everyone?" Lucas clapped his hands once, drawing attention to the front of the room. "Let's get started. We've got a lot to cover this morning." The meeting proceeded with professional efficiency as Lucas outlined overnight developments in their various operations. Shipments that needed rerouting, a territorial dispute on the south side that required delicate negotiation, intelligence suggesting the Martinez family was making moves that warranted closer monitoring. Elena tried to focus on the information, taking notes and asking relevant questions when appropriate, but her attention kept drifting across the table where Victor sat, contributing his own observations with the kind of strategic brilliance that had made him invaluable to Lucas's organization. She'd forgotten this about him. Or maybe she'd forced herself to forget. How his mind worked like a chess master's, always seeing 3 moves ahead, anticipating problems before they materialized and proposing solutions that seemed obvious only after he'd articulated them. What do you think, Elena? Lucas's question snapped her back to full attention. I'm sorry, what? Her brother raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her inattention. The Martinez situation. You worked on some analysis of their trafficking routes last year in Seattle. Any insights on their probable next moves? Heat crept up Elena's neck as she felt every eye in the room turn toward her, including Victor's knowing gaze. She scrambled to reconstruct the last 5 minutes of conversation she'd only half heard, pulling from memory of work she'd done months ago. The Martinez family operates on a quarterly expansion model, she said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. If they're making moves now in January, it means they're positioning for spring implementation. They'll want supply lines established before the weather improves and transportation becomes easier. Which means, Lucas prompted, which means they're vulnerable right now. Elena warmed to the analysis, her professional expertise overriding personal distraction. They're overextended, committing resources to infrastructure before they have the operational capacity to defend it. If you wanted to apply pressure, the next 6 weeks would be optimal timing. Lucas nodded slowly, clearly considering this angle. Victor, what do you think? I think your sister is exactly right. Victor's voice carried an edge of something that might have been pride or challenge or both. The Martinez family has always been aggressive in expansion, but sloppy in consolidation. They build first and defend second. It's a critical weakness we'd be foolish not to exploit. Agreed. Lucas made a note on his tablet. Marcus, I want surveillance increased on their new acquisition points. Jennifer, start mapping alternative supply routes in case they retaliate by disrupting our current channels. Victor, I'll reach out to our contacts in their organization. Victor finished. See if anyone's unhappy enough with the aggressive timeline to provide useful intelligence. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering territory disputes and financial projections and personnel issues that required Lucas's final approval. Through it all, Elena maintained rigid professional composure, contributing when asked and staying silent when not, all while desperately aware of Victor's presence across the table. He wasn't looking at her anymore, at least not obviously, but she could feel his attention like a physical weight, could sense him tracking her every movement and word with the same intensity he'd shown last night when his hands had been in her hair and his mouth had been claiming hers. When Lucas finally dismissed everyone, Elena gathered her notes with perhaps more haste than strictly necessary, already planning her escape route. Elena, hang back a minute, Lucas said casually, destroying that plan entirely. I want to talk to you about something. Her stomach dropped. He knew. Somehow he'd figured it out. Maybe he'd seen something in how she and Victor had looked at each other. Maybe... The rest of you, out, Lucas continued, and the room emptied quickly. Everyone except Victor, who remained in his seat, watching Elena with unreadable eyes. You too, Vic. Victor didn't move. This involves me. No, it doesn't. Lucas, out. Lucas's voice hardened into the tone that had built an empire and enforced loyalty across Chicago's underworld. I need to talk to my sister, alone. For a long moment, Victor stayed perfectly still, tension radiating from every line of his body. Then he stood with fluid grace, buttoning his suit jacket and collecting his phone. As he passed behind Elena's chair, his fingers brushed against her shoulder, so briefly that it might have been accidental, except nothing Victor did was ever accidental. The touch burned through the silk of her blouse like a brand. When the door finally closed behind him, leaving Elena alone with her brother, the silence felt suffocating. So, Lucas said eventually, moving to take the seat Victor had vacated, directly across from her. You want to tell me what's going on? I don't know what you mean. Elena, her brother's voice gentled, filling with a concern that was somehow worse than anger would have been. I've known you your entire life. I raised you after Mom and Dad died. You think I can't tell when something's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Elena insisted, even as her traitorous hands gripped her coffee cup too tightly. I'm just tired. Adjusting to being back. Lucas studied her with the same analytical intensity he brought to business negotiations and territorial disputes, the look that had always been able to see straight through her best lies. You've been back 3 days, he said quietly. And in those 3 days, you've been jumpier than I've ever seen you. You barely ate dinner last night. You look like you didn't sleep. And just now, in that meeting, you were so distracted I had to repeat your name twice. I told you, is it a man? The question hit like a physical blow, stealing whatever weak excuse Elena had been formulating. She stared at her brother, watching concern shift into something more complicated, protectiveness mixed with resignation, as if he'd already guessed the answer and was bracing himself for confirmation. Because if someone hurt you in Seattle, Lucas continued, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, if someone is the reason you came home, you need to tell me right now. No one hurt me. Elena forced the words out past the tightness in her throat. Lucas, I promise it's nothing like that. Some of the tension eased from her brother's shoulders, though his expression remained troubled. Then what is it? Elena, talk to me. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together. That's what family does. Family. The word twisted like a knife because that was exactly the problem. Victor wasn't just some man. He was Lucas's best friend, his second in command, the person he trusted more than anyone in the world except possibly Elena herself. I just need time to adjust, Elena said finally, hating the half-truth but unable to offer anything closer to honesty. Coming back after 9 years, it's harder than I expected. All the memories, all the changes. I'll be fine. I just need a few more days to find my rhythm. Lucas reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. You know you can tell me anything, right? No matter what it is, no matter how complicated. You're my sister. There's nothing more important to me than making sure you're okay. The genuine love in his voice made Elena want to cry, or confess, or both. I know, she whispered. I know, Lucas, and I'm okay. I promise. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, though skepticism still shadowed his features. All right, but if that changes, if you need anything, you'll be the first person I tell. Another lie to add to the growing collection. Lucas stood, gathering his tablet and phone. I've got a meeting across town in 30 minutes. You going to be all right here today? I can have Marcus stick around if you need. I'm fine, Elena assured him quickly. The last thing she needed was Lucas's head of security shadowing her movements. I've got plenty of work to catch up on. Go. Do whatever Empire building you have scheduled. Her brother smiled at that, some of the worry easing from his expression. Empire maintenance, mostly. Far less glamorous than it sounds. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Elena, I'm really glad you're home. Whatever brought you back, I'm glad you're here. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone in the conference room with her guilt and her coffee and the ghost of Victor's touch still burning on her shoulder. She lasted exactly 5 minutes before her phone buzzed. Garden. 20 minutes. We're finishing this conversation. Elena closed her eyes, torn between fury at Victor's presumption and relief that she wouldn't have to wait any longer for the confrontation she'd been dreading and craving in equal measure. She made it 15 minutes before giving in to inevitability. The garden occupied a surprisingly large portion of the estate's grounds, a carefully manicured space of winding paths and strategic plantings that provided both beauty and privacy. In summer, it would be spectacular. In January, it was stark and skeletal, branches bare against a gray sky that threatened snow. Elena found Victor standing near the far edge, where an ornate gazebo overlooked the frost-covered lawn. He'd shed his suit jacket despite the cold, standing in just shirt sleeves and vest, looking like some modern prince surveying his kingdom. He turned as she approached, and the expression on his face stole what little remained of her composure. Raw hunger, mixed with frustration and something that looked dangerously like hope. You're late, he said. You're presumptuous. Elena stopped a careful distance away, maintaining space between them even as every cell in her body screamed to close it. You don't get to summon me like I'm one of your subordinates, Victor. No? He moved toward her with predatory grace, erasing the distance she'd established. Then how should I treat you, Elena? Like a colleague? Like my best friend's sister? Like the woman who was in my bedroom last night with her hands on my skin and her mouth on mine? Stop. The word came out breathless rather than commanding. We can't. This can't happen. Why not? You know why not. Lucas would never forgive either of us. Your friendship, your partnership, everything you've built together would be destroyed. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent 9 years weighing exactly what I'd lose if I pursued this? He was close enough now that Elena could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights that matched her own. I know the cost, Elena. I've calculated it 1,000 different ways, and I've finally accepted that some things are worth the price. Easy for you to say. Anger flared in Elena's chest, hot and defensive and entirely necessary to combat the treacherous hope his words sparked. Lucas is your friend, your business partner, but he's my brother. The person who raised me, who sacrificed everything to give me a chance at a normal life. How am I supposed to look him in the eye and tell him I'm in love with the one man he specifically asked me to stay away from? The confession escaped before she could stop it, hanging in the cold air between them like a visible thing. Victor went absolutely still. Say that again. Don't! Say it again, Elena. He closed the final distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with devastating gentleness. Tell me what you just admitted. It doesn't matter what I feel. Elena tried to step back, but Victor's hold remained firm without being forceful, a cage she could escape if she really wanted to. They both knew she didn't want to. Feelings don't change reality. They don't change what this would cost. You love me. Victor said it like a man confirming a miracle, his gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. After 9 years, after all that distance, after everything you did to try to kill this, you still love me? I never stopped loving you. The admission tore from somewhere deep in her chest, 9 years of denial finally breaking free. That's the problem, Victor. I tried. I dated other men. I built a whole life in Seattle. I convinced myself that time and distance would cure this, but it didn't. It never did. Then why did you stay away so long? Because loving you from 2,000 miles away was bearable. Elena's voice cracked slightly, tears she'd been fighting for days finally breaking free. Missing you, wanting you, dreaming about you. I could survive that as long as I didn't have to see you, as long as I didn't have to face what I was giving up every single day. Victor's thumb brushed away a tear tracking down her cheek, his touch achingly tender. And now? Now that you're here, now that you know I feel the same way, what's bearable now? Nothing. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Being near you and not touching you, sitting across from you in meetings and pretending you're just another colleague, watching you and knowing that wanting you means losing Lucas. None of it's bearable. It's torture. Then stop torturing us both. Victor leaned his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the space between their mouths. Stop fighting this like it's something we can control or overcome. It's been 9 years, Elena. If this was going to fade, don't you think it would have happened by now? What are you suggesting? That we just act on this and deal with the consequences later? Elena forced herself to pull back slightly, needing to see his face clearly. That we destroy your friendship with Lucas because we can't control ourselves? I'm suggesting we stop letting fear make our decisions. Victor's hand slid from her face to her shoulders, holding her steady when she would have retreated further. I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Lucas will understand if we're honest with him. If we show him this is real, that we're serious about each other. You don't know him like I do. Elena shook her head, fresh tears spilling over despite her best efforts to contain them. You didn't see his face 9 years ago when he figured out what was developing between us. He wasn't just disappointed, Victor. He was terrified. Terrified that mixing his personal life with his business would compromise everything he'd worked for. Terrified that if it ended badly, he'd lose both of us. And if it doesn't end badly? Victor challenged. What if this is exactly what it feels like? Inevitable and permanent and worth fighting for. Then we still hurt him. We still betray his trust. We still force him to choose between his best friend and his sister, and no matter which one he chooses, someone gets destroyed in the process. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. So what's your solution? We just pretend last night didn't happen? Go back to avoiding each other and maintaining polite distance while we both slowly die inside? I don't have a solution. Elena pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that kept coming. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to choose between the two most important people in my life. You shouldn't have to choose. But I do. She dropped her hands, meeting his gaze with all the hopeless love she'd been hiding for 9 years laid bare in her expression. And that's what makes this impossible. Victor pulled her against his chest suddenly, wrapping his arms around her with fierce protectiveness. Elena should have resisted, should have maintained the distance she'd been fighting for. Instead, she melted into his embrace, pressing her face against his shirt and breathing in the scent of him, expensive cologne and coffee, and something indefinably Victor that had haunted her dreams for years. "I won't push you," he murmured against her hair. "I won't force you into a position where you have to choose. But Elena, I need you to understand something." He pulled back just enough to tilt her face up toward his. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not giving up on this. On us. I waited 9 years, and I'll wait 90 more if that's what it takes. But I'm not pretending anymore. I can't. Victor, I love you." The declaration fell into the space between them with the weight of absolute truth. "I've loved you since you were 19 years old and looked at me across that ballroom like I'd hung the stars. I've loved you through every day of the last 9 years, through every woman I dated trying to forget you, through every night I dreamed about what might have been if we'd been brave enough to fight for this." Elena's breath caught in her chest, her heart simultaneously soaring and breaking at his confession. "So here's what's going to happen," Victor continued, his voice steady despite the emotion flickering across his features. "I'm going to give you time, space, whatever you need to figure out what you want, but I'm also going to be honest with you, with myself, and eventually with Lucas if it comes to that, because I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending this doesn't matter. And if I can't," Elena's voice broke, "if I can't find a way to make this work without destroying everything, then I'll accept that." Victor's thumb traced her jawline with heartbreaking tenderness. "I'll respect your choice, but I need you to make that choice knowing the full truth, that I love you, that I want you, and that there's nothing I wouldn't give up for a chance at a real future together. Even your friendship with Lucas?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Victor's jaw tightened, pain flashing through his eyes before being replaced by iron determination. "Even that? If it came down to choosing between his friendship and a life with you, Elena, there's no contest. There never has been." Before Elena could respond, before she could process the enormity of what he was offering to sacrifice, voices drifted across the garden, laughter and conversation drawing closer. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, Victor running a hand through his hair, while Elena frantically wiped at her tear-stained cheeks. 2 junior associates rounded the corner of the path, deep in discussion about something Elena couldn't focus on through the pounding of her heart. The men nodded politely as they passed, their attention too focused on their conversation to notice the tension crackling in the air. When they'd moved out of earshot, Elena turned back to Victor, finding him watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly. "I know. But you need time." "Yes," Victor nodded slowly, accepting her answer even as frustration shadowed his features. "Then take it. But Elena?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Don't take 9 more years, because I don't think either of us can survive that again." He walked away before she could respond, his silhouette growing smaller against the gray winter sky until he disappeared entirely, leaving Elena alone in the garden where this had all begun so many years ago. She sank onto the gazebo bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Around her, the skeletal branches swayed in the cold wind, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the sounds of the estate going about its daily business, cars coming and going, voices calling instructions, the ordinary rhythms of a criminal empire disguised as a legitimate enterprise. Elena closed her eyes, pressing one hand against her chest where her heart still raced from Victor's proximity, from his confession, from the impossible weight of loving someone you couldn't have without destroying everything else you held dear. She'd thought coming back to Chicago would provide clarity, would help her understand whether what she'd felt for Victor had been real or simply the product of proximity and forbidden attraction, and youth's tendency to romanticize the unattainable. Instead, she'd discovered that 9 years had only intensified everything, the wanting, the loving, the impossible certainty that Victor Hale was the only man she'd ever won in quite this way, completely, desperately, with the kind of consuming passion that made everything else fade into insignificance. But certainty didn't solve anything. It didn't change the fundamental equation. Choosing Victor meant losing Lucas, and losing Lucas meant destroying the family bond that had defined her entire life. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands, half expecting another message from Victor. Instead, it was Lucas. "Dinner tonight? Just the 2 of us. Want to hear about Seattle, about your plans while you're here. Miss hanging out with my little sister." Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks as she typed her response. "Of course. I'd love that." Because she would. Because despite everything, despite the impossible situation she'd walked into, Lucas was still her brother, still the person who'd sacrificed his own youth to raise her, still the most important relationship in her life. Except he wasn't. Not anymore. Victor had become that. Somewhere over 9 years of distance and denial, and desperate attempts to convince herself that first love could be overcome, Victor Hale had become the most important person in her world. And Elena had absolutely no idea how to reconcile those two truths without someone getting destroyed in the process. The gala was everything Elena had been dreading. 300 of Chicago's elite packed into the Intercontinental Ballroom, champagne flowing like water, and Victor Hale standing near the bar in a tuxedo that should have been illegal. She'd spent the past 2 weeks perfecting the art of controlled distance, polite nods across conference rooms, brief professional exchanges when business demanded it, careful orchestration to ensure they were never alone together, never close enough for him to repeat his garden confession or for her to admit how much those words had undone her. It was torture of the slowest, most exquisite kind. Tonight, however, offered no escape routes. Lucas had insisted both she and Victor attend this charity event, some cancer research foundation that several of their legitimate business partners supported. Declining would have raised questions neither of them could afford to answer. So Elena had armed herself with a midnight blue gown that hugged every curve before flowing to the floor in elegant waves, had styled her dark hair into an intricate updo that took 45 minutes to perfect, and had walked into the ballroom with her head high and her heart hammering against her ribs. That had been 2 hours ago. She'd spent the intervening time being introduced to what felt like every wealthy socialite in Chicago, making small talk about her years in Seattle, deflecting questions about whether she planned to stay, all while hyper-aware of exactly where Victor was in the room at any given moment. He was dancing now with Isabel Morrison, daughter of one of Lucas's investment partners, a willowy blonde who laughed at something Victor said while pressing unnecessarily close. Elena told herself the jealousy burning through her chest was ridiculous, unjustified. She had no claim on him, had made it abundantly clear that pursuing anything between them was impossible. That didn't stop her from wanting to cross the ballroom and remove Isabel's perfectly manicured hand from Victor's shoulder. "You're staring." Lucas appeared at her elbow, holding 2 champagne flutes and wearing an expression of brotherly amusement. "Try to be less obvious about it." Elena's stomach dropped as she tore her gaze away from the dance floor. "I wasn't staring. I was just glaring daggers at Isabel Morrison while Victor dances with her." Lucas handed her one of the glasses, his smile sharpening slightly. "Elena, I've seen that look before. Usually right before you systematically destroyed whatever toy I'd been playing with that you decided should be yours instead. I was 6 years old. You were territorial." Lucas took a sip of his champagne, his attention drifting to where Victor and Isabel swayed to the orchestra's rendition of something classical and romantic. "Some things don't change, I guess." Elena's pulse quickened, fear spiking through the jealousy. Did he know? Had he figured it out despite all her careful avoidance? "I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Her brother's voice had lost its teasing edge, replaced by something more serious. "Elena, you've been home for 2 weeks. In that time you've been jumpy, distracted, and clearly avoiding someone. I'm not an idiot. I know the signs." "Lucas, is it Victor?" The question landed like a physical blow, stealing Elena's breath and confirming her worst fear. He knew. Somehow, he'd figured it out, and now everything was about to implode. "I don't—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't form a coherent lie under the weight of her brother's knowing gaze. Lucas sighed, setting his champagne glass down on a nearby table. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did something happen between you two while you were in Seattle? Is that why you came back?" "What? No." That, at least, was completely true. "Lucas, I haven't seen Victor in 9 years, not once. I promised you I'd stay away, and I did." Some of the tension eased from her brother's shoulders, though concern still shadowed his features. "Then what's going on? Because the way you two have been dancing around each other, the tension whenever you're in the same room, Elena, it's like watching a bomb waiting to explode." "There's nothing going on," Elena insisted, hating the lie but unable to offer truth that would destroy them all. "I think maybe it's just weird being back, seeing him again after so long. It brings up old feelings that I thought I'd dealt with. Old feelings that include wanting to murder any woman who gets too close to him." Elena flushed, caught in her own transparent jealousy. I wasn't It's not like that, isn't it? Lucas studied her with the analytical intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. Elena, I'm going to be straight with you. I asked you to keep your distance from Victor 9 years ago for specific reasons. Those reasons haven't changed. If anything, they've become more complicated. I know. I remember. Every word of that conversation was burned into Elena's memory. Lucas's careful explanation of why mixing family with business was dangerous, why her developing feelings for his best friend represented a threat to everything he'd built. Do you? Her brother's voice softened slightly. Because I'm not sure you understand how precarious things are right now. The Martinez family is making aggressive moves. We've got territorial disputes on 3 fronts. Victor is the only person I trust completely to have my back when things get ugly. I need him focused, undistracted, and Elena, you are the most beautiful distraction I can imagine. The compliment, delivered with brotherly affection, somehow made everything worse. Lucas, I'm not trying to distract anyone. I'm just trying to do my job and help you with... I know. He squeezed her shoulder gently. I know you're not doing it on purpose. But that doesn't change the reality. Victor has been different since you came back. More on edge, making mistakes he never makes. Yesterday, he nearly greenlit a shipment without proper verification because he was distracted during the briefing. That's not like him. Guilt twisted through Elena's chest like a physical pain. I didn't mean to... Hey, Lucas's voice gentled further. I'm not blaming you. I'm just asking you to be aware. And maybe, if those old feelings are still there, to consider whether staying in Chicago is really the best choice for everyone involved. The suggestion felt like ice water down her spine. You want me to leave? I want you to be happy. Lucas pulled her into a brief hug, speaking against her hair. More than anything, I want that. But Elena, if being here means opening old wounds that never properly healed, if it means putting yourself through torture, watching Victor move on with his life, maybe Seattle is where you belong after all. He released her and stepped back, his expression a complicated mix of love and concern and something that looked like resignation. Think about it, okay? No rush. Just consider what's best for you, not what you think I need. Then he was gone, moving off to greet newly arrived guests, leaving Elena standing alone with her champagne and her guilt and the terrible knowledge that her brother was right about everything except the most important part. Victor wasn't moving on with his life. He was waiting. For her. For some sign that she was ready to fight for what they both wanted despite the cost. And Elena was slowly realizing that she might not be strong enough to be what he needed. The orchestra transitioned to a new song, something slower and more intimate. Elena's attention drifted back to the dance floor against her will, finding Victor precisely where she'd known he would be, still with Isabel, though his expression had shifted to something politely distant rather than engaged. Then his eyes lifted, scanning the crowd until they found Elena across the ballroom. The impact of that gaze hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making the crowded room seem to narrow until only the two of them existed. She watched his jaw tighten, watched some decision crystallize behind his gray eyes. He said something to Isabel, probably an excuse, and began moving toward Elena with deliberate purpose. Panic spiked through her system. Not here, not in front of hundreds of people. Not when Lucas had just finished warning her about being a distraction. Elena turned and walked quickly toward the terrace doors, needing air and space and distance from Victor's approaching form. The cold January night bit through her thin gown the moment she stepped outside, but she welcomed the shock of it, the way it cut through emotional confusion with physical discomfort. The terrace was blessedly empty, other guests clearly too smart to brave the freezing temperatures for fresh air. Elena moved to the railing, gripping the cold stone and staring out at Chicago's glittering skyline while she tried to regulate her breathing. Running away? Victor's voice came from behind her, closer than she'd expected. That's becoming a habit. I needed air. Elena didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to face him when her defenses were already this compromised. Go back inside, Victor. I'm sure Isabel is wondering where you went. I don't care what Isabel is wondering. His footsteps approached until she could feel him just behind her, close enough to block the wind, but not quite touching. I care about why you looked like you wanted to commit murder when you saw me dancing with her. I didn't. Don't lie. Victor's hands came to rest on the railing on either side of hers, caging her in without actually making contact. I saw your face, Elena. Saw exactly what you were feeling. The same thing I feel every time I see you smile at another man or laugh at someone else's jokes. Elena closed her eyes, her fingers tightening on the stone until her knuckles went white. This isn't fair. No, it's not. His breath stirred the hair at her temple, warm against her chilled skin. But we're past fair now. We're past pretending this doesn't exist or that distance makes it manageable. Lucas just told me, Elena's voice cracked slightly. He basically asked me to leave, to go back to Seattle because having me here is distracting you, making you sloppy. Victor went very still behind her. He said that? Not in those exact words, but the message was clear. I'm a complication you don't need, a threat to everything he's built. She finally turned to face him, finding his expression tight with barely controlled anger. He's right, Victor. You know he is. This thing between us, it's already causing problems, and we haven't even acted on it. We did act on it. Victor's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. 2 weeks ago, in my bedroom. And in the garden, when I told you I loved you. We've been acting on it every time we look at each other, every time we pretend we can stay away. Those were mistakes. No. The word came out sharp, definitive. They were the only honest moments we've had in 9 years. Everything else, the distance, the avoidance, the careful professionalism, that's the mistake. Elena shook her head, even as she leaned into his touch like a flower seeking sunlight. Victor, I can't. Marcus Daniels, a voice called from the terrace doors. Elena and Victor sprang apart as a middle-aged man in an expensive suit approached, his expression friendly but curious. Thought that was you out here. And Victor Hale, as I live and breathe. Don't you two know it's freezing? Marcus. Victor's voice had smoothed into professional courtesy so quickly that Elena might have believed she'd imagined the raw emotion of seconds before. Good to see you. Elena, this is Marcus Daniels. He handles security consultation for several of our partners. Marcus, Elena Ward, Lucas's sister. A pleasure. Marcus shook her hand with genuine warmth. Lucas mentioned you'd come back to town. How are you finding Chicago after your time away? Cold, Elena managed, grateful for the excuse her shivering provided. I'd forgotten how brutal January can be. Marcus laughed. That's what you get for abandoning us for the Pacific Northwest. Though I have to say, Victor here seems to be handling the cold just fine, barely even wearing a coat. I run hot. Victor's eyes met Elena's briefly, and the double meaning in his words sent heat flooding through her despite the temperature. Well, I'll let you two get back inside before you turn into ice sculptures. Marcus clapped Victor on the shoulder. Victor, we should grab lunch next week. I've got some ideas about the new security protocols you mentioned. Sounds good. Call Jennifer to set it up. When Marcus had disappeared back into the ballroom, Elena and Victor stood in loaded silence, the conversation they'd been having hanging unfinished between them. We should go back in, Elena said finally. People will notice if we're both gone too long. Let them notice. But Victor stepped back, creating necessary distance even as everything in his expression argued against it. Elena, this conversation isn't... I know. She cut him off before he could finish, before he could say something that would make leaving impossible. But not here. Not tonight. There are 300 witnesses and my brother watching my every move. Please, Victor, not tonight. For a long moment, she thought he might argue, might push until she either gave in completely or broke down entirely. Instead, he nodded slowly, defeat and frustration warring across his features. 1 week, he said quietly. I'm giving you 1 more week to figure out what you want, to decide if you're brave enough to fight for this, or if you're going to run back to Seattle and spend another 9 years pretending you can live without me. And if I choose Seattle, Victor's jaw clenched, pain flashing through his eyes before being replaced by iron determination. Then I'll respect your decision. But Elena, make sure it's actually your decision, not Lucas's fear, not your guilt, not your worry about what people will think. If you walk away from this, from us, make sure it's because you genuinely don't want me enough to fight for it. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving Elena alone on the terrace with her racing heart and the terrible knowledge that she did want him enough to fight for it. She just wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive the war that fighting would require. Elena forced herself to wait 5 minutes before following Victor inside, using the time to compose her expression and regulate her breathing. When she finally re-entered the ballroom, she scanned the crowd quickly, cataloging positions and potential problems. Victor stood near the bar, deep in conversation with two men she didn't recognize. His expression was professionally engaged, nothing in his posture suggesting the emotionally charged confrontation that had just occurred. Lucas was across the room, laughing at something one of his investment partners had said. He caught Elena's eye and smiled, gesturing her over. She'd made it perhaps 3 steps in his direction when Isabel Morrison appeared at her elbow, all blonde perfection and practiced charm. "Elena, isn't it?" Isabel's smile was friendly but assessing. "I wanted to introduce myself properly. Your brother has mentioned you several times." "All good things, I hope." Elena accepted the hand Isabel offered, noting the strength in her grip. "Of course, he clearly adores you." Isabel's gaze drifted toward where Victor stood. "I have to say, you're lucky to work so closely with such talented men. Victor especially. He's quite remarkable." Something in Isabel's tone set Elena's teeth on edge, a possessiveness that had no right to exist, a claim being staked in the most polite possible terms. "Victor is very good at what he does," Elena agreed neutrally. "He certainly is." Isabel's smile sharpened slightly. "We've been seeing each other, you know. Nothing serious yet, but I have high hopes. He's exactly the kind of man I've been looking for. Powerful, intelligent, gorgeous." She paused, her eyes finding Elena's with deliberate challenge. "Unmarried." The implication was clear. Victor was available, and Isabel intended to claim him. Elena felt something crack in her chest, rage and jealousy and territorial possessiveness all surging up in a wave she couldn't quite control. Every carefully constructed defense, every rational argument for why she should stay away from Victor, evaporated in the face of another woman declaring her intention to pursue him. "How lovely for you," Elena heard herself say, her voice saccharine sweet and utterly unconvincing. "Though I should mention that Victor tends to be, what's the word, non-committal. I'd hate for you to get your hopes up only to be disappointed." Isabel's smile froze slightly. "And you would know this how? I was under the impression you just moved back to Chicago after being gone for years. I've known Victor since I was 19. Elena lifted her chin, some reckless part of her brain taking over completely. "I probably understand him better than anyone except my brother." "How fascinating." Isabel's tone had gone sharp, her friendly facade cracking. "Then perhaps you can tell me, is there some reason Victor seems so distracted lately? So tense? He's been wonderful to me, but there's something he's holding back. Something or someone he can't quite let go of." The accusation hung between them, thinly veiled by polite phrasing. Elena should have deflected, should have smiled and claimed ignorance and extracted herself from this increasingly dangerous conversation. Instead, she met Isabel's gaze with unflinching directness. "Maybe you should ask him that yourself," she said softly, "though I suspect you won't like the answer." Isabel's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Lucas was striding toward the doors, his expression thunderous, with Marcus and several other security personnel following quickly. Elena's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She moved toward her brother instinctively, arriving just as he was pulling on his coat and barking instructions into his phone. "What's happened?" she demanded. Lucas looked at her, and the fury in his expression made her step back. "Someone's been skimming from our accounts, $50,000 over the past month. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but my accountant finally caught the pattern. Who? The transactions were authorized using your employee code." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "What? That's impossible. I haven't authorized any— Lucas, I swear to you, I didn't— "I know you didn't." Her brother's voice gentled slightly, though anger still simmered beneath the surface. "Someone set you up, used your access to cover their theft, and I'm going to find out who and make them regret every cent they stole." Victor appeared at Lucas's shoulder, his expression dark with controlled rage. "I've already got people pulling security footage from your office. We'll find who accessed her computer." "It had to be someone with inside knowledge," Marcus added. "Someone who knew Elena would have the right level of access, but wouldn't be monitoring transactions closely yet since she just started." Elena's mind raced, trying to process the implications. Someone had deliberately framed her, had stolen money and made it look like she was responsible. Why? To discredit her? To drive a wedge between her and Lucas? To force her out of Chicago? Elena. Lucas's hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to focus on his face. I need you to think. Has anyone asked you suspicious questions about your access codes? Have you noticed anyone paying unusual attention to your computer or your work? No, I don't. She shook her head, fear and confusion making coherent thought difficult. Lucas, I've been careful. I haven't given anyone my codes or left my computer unlocked. I don't know how this happened. We'll figure it out. Her brother pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. I know you didn't do this, but until we identify who did, you're in danger. Whoever set this up clearly wants to hurt you, discredit you. That makes you a target. I'll take her home, Victor said immediately. Get her somewhere safe while you investigate. No. Lucas's refusal was instant. You're my second. I need you helping coordinate the search. Marcus can take Elena back to the estate, and with all due respect, if someone is targeting your sister, I'm the best protection she's got. Victor's voice had gone cold and professional, but Elena could see the barely controlled fury simmering beneath. Marcus is excellent at his job, but he's not me, and right now Elena needs the best. Lucas looked between Victor and Elena, something complicated flickering across his features. For a moment Elena thought he might argue, might insist on other arrangements. Instead, he nodded curtly. Fine. But Victor, you call me with updates every hour, and Elena stays locked down until we know who did this and why. Understood. The drive back to the estate passed in tense silence. Victor drove with aggressive precision, his jaw clenched and his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Elena sat in the passenger seat, still wearing her evening gown, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Someone had framed her. Someone wanted her discredited or driven away, or worse, and she had no idea who or why. Victor, she started. Not yet. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. Let me get you somewhere safe first, then we'll talk. They pulled through the estate gates 20 minutes later. Victor parked near the east wing entrance and came around to open her door, his hand finding the small of her back as he guided her inside with protective intensity. He led her directly to his private quarters, the same rooms where this had all begun 2 weeks ago, with a locked door and a kiss that had changed everything. You can't stay in your room, Victor explained before she could protest. If someone got access to your employee codes, they might have access to your quarters too. You'll stay here where I can protect you. Elena should have argued, should have insisted on other arrangements that didn't involve being alone with Victor in his bedroom while her emotions were already this raw and her defenses this compromised. Instead, she sank onto his couch and dropped her face into her hands, exhaustion and fear and delayed shock finally catching up. I don't understand, she whispered. Who would do this? Who hates me enough to frame me for theft? Victor crossed to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pressing one into her hands before settling beside her on the couch. I don't know yet, but Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She looked up, finding his expression serious and his gray eyes burning with intensity. This wasn't random, he continued. Someone targeted you specifically, which means someone either knows or suspects what's between us and wants to eliminate you as a complication. Or, he paused, his jaw tightening, or someone wants to drive you away from Chicago entirely. But who? I have suspicions. Victor took a long drink of his whiskey. But I need to verify them before I say anything to Lucas. I need to be absolutely certain. Tell me. Elena set her own glass down, leaning forward. Victor, if you know something, I don't know anything yet. He cut her off gently. But I have suspicions. And Elena, if I'm right about who did this and why... His hand came up to cup her face, his touch achingly tender. Everything is about to get a lot more complicated. Before she could demand more explanation, Victor's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stood quickly. It's Lucas. I need to take this. He moved to the far side of the room, speaking in low tones Elena couldn't quite make out. She watched him pace, watched tension coil through his shoulders and back, watched his free hand curl into a fist as whatever Lucas was telling him clearly made him furious. When he finally ended the call, the expression on his face sent ice through Elena's veins. What? She demanded. What did he find? Victor turned to face her, and the war raging behind his eyes made her breath catch. The security footage shows someone accessing your computer 2 days ago while you were at lunch. They used your login, transferred the money, then cleared the history. Who? Jennifer, Lucas's logistics coordinator. Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of this information. Jennifer had always been polite but distant, professional without being particularly friendly. Why would she? Because I ended things with her 6 months ago. Victor's voice had gone flat, emotionless in a way that suggested he was barely controlling his rage. We'd been casually seeing each other for a few weeks. Nothing serious. But when I ended it, she didn't take it well, said I was making a mistake, that we were perfect together, that I'd regret letting her go. Understanding crashed over Elena with sickening force. She knows about us. Or she suspects. Victor moved back to the couch, sitting close enough that their knees touched. Either way, she clearly sees you as competition, as the reason I ended things with her. But you ended things 6 months ago. I wasn't even in Chicago. No. Victor's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. But I never looked at Jennifer the way I look at you. Never felt for her what I feel for you. She must have realized she was a placeholder, not a priority. And when you came back, he shook his head. She would have seen immediately that she never had a chance. Elena pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. So this is my fault. Another woman's jealousy, another complication caused by this thing between us that we keep pretending doesn't affect anyone else. This is not your fault. Victor stood too, his voice sharp. This is Jennifer making dangerous criminal choices because she can't accept reality. This is on her, not you. But it wouldn't have happened if I'd stayed in Seattle. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. Lucas was right. I'm a distraction, a complication. I put everything at risk just by being here. Stop. Victor crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. Stop taking responsibility for other people's actions. Stop making yourself smaller to accommodate everyone else's fears. What else am I supposed to do? Elena's voice cracked. Every day I'm here, things get worse. You're distracted. Lucas is worried. Now someone's literally framing me for crimes to drive me away. How much more evidence do I need that Chicago isn't where I belong? You belong with me. Victor said it with absolute certainty, his hands tightening on her shoulders. I don't care what obstacles we face or who tries to tear us apart. You belong with me, Elena. You always have. That's not enough. Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked and unstoppable. Love isn't enough when it costs this much, when it threatens everything around us. Then what is enough? Victor demanded. What would it take for you to stop running, to stop letting fear make your decisions? Elena stared at him, at this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man who'd held her heart for 9 years, who'd waited and watched and loved her from a distance because she'd been too scared to close it. I don't know, she whispered. I honestly don't know if anything is enough. Victor's expression crumbled, pain replacing anger in his gray eyes. Then maybe you should go back to Seattle after all. Maybe Lucas is right. Maybe loving you from 2,000 miles away is all I'm ever going to get. He released her and stepped back, creating distance that felt like a chasm. I'll have Marcus take you back to your room, Victor continued, his voice carefully controlled. You'll be safe there for tonight. Tomorrow, Lucas will deal with Jennifer and clear your name, and then you can decide whether you're staying or going. Whether I'm worth fighting for or just another complication, you're better off avoiding. Victor, please leave, Elena. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with tension. I can't look at you right now and not beg you to stay. And I'm done begging. I'm done fighting for someone who won't fight for themselves. The dismissal shattered something in Elena's chest. She wanted to argue, to explain, to make him understand. But what could she say? That she loved him but not enough to risk her relationship with Lucas? That she wanted him but feared the wanting too much to act on it? None of it would change the fundamental truth. She was too scared to choose him. And Victor deserved better than that. Elena left his quarters without another word, her gown trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. By the time she reached her own room, the first sob had broken free. By the time she'd locked her door and collapsed on her bed, still wearing her elegant gown and her jewelry and the perfume she'd chosen specifically because Victor had once mentioned liking that scent, she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. She'd lost him. Through her own fear and indecision and inability to be brave enough, she'd lost the only man she'd ever loved. And the worst part was knowing she had no one to blame but herself. Elena woke to pounding on her door and sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. Her head throbbed from crying herself to sleep, and her evening gown was twisted uncomfortably around her body, the delicate fabric creased beyond repair. "Elena!" Lucas's voice carried through the door, sharp with urgency. "Open up, now!" She stumbled to the door, still half asleep and disoriented, pulling it open to find her brother flanked by Marcus and two security personnel she didn't recognize. "Get dressed," Lucas said without preamble, his expression grim. "We've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" Elena's voice came out rough from sleep and tears. "The kind where Jennifer didn't work alone." Lucas pushed past her into the room, his entire body radiating controlled fury. "We picked her up an hour ago. She broke in under 20 minutes. Gave us names, locations, everything." Elena's stomach dropped. "What do you mean she didn't work alone?" "She was working for the Martinez family." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "They approached her 3 months ago, offered her $250,000 to create chaos in my organization. Framing you was just the opening move." The words didn't seem real. Elena sank onto the edge of her bed, her mind struggling to process this new threat. "Why me? Why would they—" "Because they're smart." Marcus spoke up from the doorway, his expression apologetic. "They researched Lucas's vulnerabilities, found out his sister had come back after 9 years away. Figured causing trouble for you would distract him, maybe drive you away again and hurt him emotionally. They were right." Lucas's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "I've been so focused on protecting you, on making sure this situation with Jennifer got resolved, that I missed what they were really doing. While we were investigating the theft, Martinez moved product through 3 of our territories, paid off 2 of our distributors, set up operations in areas we've controlled for 5 years. Elena's breath caught. "Lucas, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. This isn't your fault." Her brother crossed to her, gripping her shoulders with gentle firmness. "This is Martinez being opportunistic and Jennifer being a vindictive traitor. You're the victim here, not the problem." "Where's Victor?" The question escaped before Elena could stop it, her heart already knowing something was wrong by his absence. Lucas's expression darkened further. "That's the other situation. Victor left 2 hours ago to handle something. Won't tell me what, won't answer his phone, just said it was related to Jennifer and he'd be back by noon." Cold fear sliced through Elena's chest. "Left to go where?" "I don't know." Frustration edged Lucas's voice. "He's been off since the gala, distracted, angry. Elena, did something happen between you two last night? Because he's not acting like himself, and I need my second-in-command focused right now." The memory of Victor's devastated expression flashed through Elena's mind, the way he'd told her to leave, the resignation in his voice when he'd said he was done fighting for someone who wouldn't fight for themselves. "We had a disagreement," she said carefully, "about the situation with Jennifer. He was angry that someone had targeted me. It wasn't entirely a lie, just not the whole truth." Lucas studied her with those 2 perceptive eyes, clearly sensing there was more to the story. But before he could press further, his phone rang. "Talk to me," he answered, his expression shifting from concern to alarmed in the space of a breath. "When? How many? No, don't engage until I get there. Keep eyes on them and wait for my signal." He ended the call and turned to Marcus. "Martinez has 8 men surrounding the warehouse on Collins Street. They're armed and they're not being subtle about it." "That's where we're storing the pharmaceutical shipment," Marcus said, already moving toward the door. "If they take that, we lose $2 million in product and our distribution network on the south side." "Which is exactly why they're targeting it." Lucas grabbed his coat, his mind clearly already strategizing. "Marcus, get the team together. Elena," he turned back to his sister. "You stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Victor." "Lucas, let me help. I can—" "No." The word was absolute, allowing no argument. "You're already a target. I'm not putting you in more danger. Stay here. That's an order." Then he was gone, Marcus and the security team following, leaving Elena alone in her room with fear clawing at her chest and questions spinning through her mind. Where was Victor? What was he handling that he couldn't tell Lucas about? And why did Elena have the terrible certainty that whatever he was doing was connected to her, to them, to the impossible situation they'd created by loving each other? She lasted 15 minutes before the waiting became unbearable. Elena changed quickly into jeans and a sweater, then grabbed her phone and pulled up Victor's contact information. Her finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before she pressed it. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Terror and fury warred in Elena's chest. Victor was shutting her out, handling something dangerous without backup, and she had no way to reach him or help him or even know if he was safe. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want to see Victor alive, come to the old factory on Riverside Drive, alone. Tell anyone and he dies. Elena's blood turned to ice. The message was simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. Someone had Victor. Someone was using him to lure her out. Every rational instinct screamed at her to call Lucas, to get backup, to let the professionals handle this. But the message had been clear. Tell anyone, and Victor dies. She couldn't risk it. Couldn't gamble with Victor's life on the chance that whoever had him was bluffing. Elena grabbed her coat and slipped out of the estate through the kitchen entrance, where staff were too busy with morning routines to notice one more person passing through. She called a car service, giving the driver an address 3 blocks from the factory, then walked the rest of the way with her heart pounding and her mind racing through terrible scenarios. The factory loomed against the gray morning sky, an abandoned relic from Chicago's industrial past, all broken windows and rusted metal and shadows that could hide anything. Elena approached slowly, scanning for threats, looking for any sign of Victor or his captors. "I'm here," she called out, her voice echoing off concrete and steel. "I came alone like you asked. Where is he, Batsy?" Movement in her peripheral vision made her spin. A figure emerged from the shadows. Jennifer, looking nothing like the polished professional Elena had seen in meetings. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she held a gun with the kind of trembling grip that suggested she'd never actually fired one before. "You actually came!" Jennifer laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "I thought maybe you'd be smarter than that. Thought you'd call for help. Where's Victor?" Elena kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "The message said if I came alone. Victor isn't here, you idiot." Jennifer moved closer, the gun wavering but still pointed in Elena's general direction. "There is no Victor in danger. There's just me, using the only leverage that would guarantee you'd show up." Understanding crashed over Elena with sickening force. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was a trap, and she'd walked right into it. "Lucas has you in custody," Elena said, buying time while her mind raced for escape routes. "How did you—" "I told him what he wanted to hear, gave him just enough truth to satisfy him, then his people got sloppy during transport." Jennifer's smile turned cruel. "Martinez's men created a distraction at the warehouse. Lucas and all his best people rushed to defend it, left me with 2 junior guards who were very easy to overcome." "So you're working with Martinez?" "I'm working for myself." Jennifer's voice turned sharp, bitter. "Martinez paid me to cause problems for Lucas. But framing you for theft, getting you kicked out of Chicago, that was my bonus project, my way of eliminating the competition." "I'm not your competition." Elena kept her hands visible, non-threatening. "Jennifer, whatever you think is between Victor and me, don't." The gun steadied, Jennifer's finger tightening on the trigger. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending there's nothing there. I saw how he looked at you at the gala, how he's been different since you came back. He ended things with me 6 months ago, and I couldn't understand why. We were good together, compatible, but then you returned and suddenly it all made sense." "Victor and I aren't together," Elena tried, even though the words tasted like lies. "Maybe not yet, but you would be if I didn't exist, if you weren't so worried about your brother's approval." Jennifer took another step forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear. Martinez's men are going to find your body in a few days, make it look like retaliation for Lucas's interference in their operations. Lucas will be devastated, distracted, vulnerable. Martinez will use that to take over more territory. And Victor—" her voice cracked slightly. "Victor will finally be free to move on. Maybe even come back to me once he's had time to grieve. You're delusional if you think Victor would ever—" The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and for one terrible moment Elena thought she'd been hit. Then she realized Jennifer had fired into the concrete near her feet, a warning shot. "Shut up," Jennifer hissed. "I'm done listening to you, done watching you take things that should be mine. You had 9 years away from Chicago, 9 years to build a different life, but you couldn't stay gone, could you? Had to come back and ruin everything." Elena's mind raced, calculating distances and angles and the likelihood she could rush Jennifer before the other woman fired again. Not good odds. Jennifer might be unstable, but she was also desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Martinez is using you, Elena said, trying a different approach. You really think he's going to let you walk away after this? That he won't tie up loose ends by making sure you can't testify against him? Uncertainty flickered across Jennifer's face. I'm not an idiot. I have insurance. Evidence of his involvement that gets released if anything happens to me. The same way you had evidence against Lucas that was supposed to protect you? Elena pressed. How's that working out? You're here, aren't you? Holding a gun on me instead of safely in witness protection or on a beach somewhere spending your payoff. Because of you! Jennifer's composure cracked further, rage and pain pouring through. Everything fell apart because of you. If you just stayed in Seattle where you belonged. Jennifer, listen to me. Elena softened her voice, trying to find the rational person beneath the desperation. Whatever happens here, it doesn't end well for you. If you kill me, Lucas will never stop hunting you. Victor will never forgive you. Martinez will eliminate you as a liability. Your only chance is to put down the gun and let me help you. Help me, Jennifer laughed, the sound brittle and broken. Like you helped Victor? Like you helped your brother? You help people by leaving them, Elena. It's what you do best. The accusation hit harder than it should have, striking at the core of Elena's deepest fear, that she was fundamentally someone who ran when things got difficult, who chose self-preservation over fighting for what she wanted. You're right, Elena said quietly. I do run. I left Chicago 9 years ago instead of fighting for what I wanted. I've spent the last 2 weeks avoiding Victor instead of being honest about how I feel. I've let fear make my decisions for so long that I forgot how to be brave. Jennifer's gun wavered slightly, confusion crossing her features. But I'm done running, Elena continued, taking a small step forward. I'm done letting fear control me. So here's what's going to happen, Jennifer. You're going to put down that gun. We're going to walk out of here together. And I'm going to make sure Lucas knows you cooperated, that you helped stop Martinez's plan. Why would you do that? Suspicion laced Jennifer's voice. Why would you help me after everything I've done? Because I understand what it's like to want someone you can't have. To make terrible choices because you're desperate and scared and convinced there's no other way. Elena took another step. And because killing me won't give you what you want. It won't make Victor love you. It'll just make you a murderer. For a long moment, Jennifer stood frozen, the gun shaking in her grip. Then, slowly, she lowered it. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she whispered. I thought if you were gone, if there was no competition, I know. Elena moved carefully closer, reaching out to take the gun from Jennifer's trembling hands. I know what it's like to love someone and think you're not enough. But Jennifer, this isn't the answer. It never was. The moment Elena's fingers closed around the gun, everything happened at once. The factory's main door slammed open. Victor burst through, flanked by Marcus and 4 security personnel, all armed and moving with tactical precision. Elena! Victor's voice carried across the space, rough with fear and relief and fury all tangled together. Jennifer lunged backward, yanking the gun away from Elena and raising it again with desperate, trembling hands. Stay back! All of you, stay back or I'll... You'll what? Victor moved forward slowly, his entire focus on Jennifer. Shoot the woman I love? The only person in this world who matters more to me than my own life? Is that really how you want this to end? The declaration rang through the empty factory, raw and honest and utterly unambiguous. Elena's breath caught as she watched Victor advance, saw the absolute certainty in his eyes, heard the truth he'd just proclaimed in front of witnesses and subordinates and anyone who might report back to Lucas. He'd stopped hiding, stopped pretending, and in doing so, he'd removed any doubt about where his loyalties lay. You love her? Jennifer's voice broke on the words. After everything, after all the time we spent together, you love her? I've loved her for 9 years. Victor kept moving forward, closing the distance with careful, measured steps. Since before you and I ever met. Since before I knew what it meant to love someone so much that living without them felt like dying. So yes, Jennifer, I love her, and I will do whatever it takes to protect her. Even if it costs you Lucas? Jennifer swung the gun between Elena and Victor, her control slipping further with each word. Even if it destroys your friendship and your position and everything you've built. Even then, Victor's voice was steel-wrapped in certainty. Elena is my choice. She's always been my choice. I was just too much of a coward to say it out loud until now. Jennifer's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as the last of her composure shattered. I could have made you happy. We were good together. No. Victor shook his head, his expression softening slightly with genuine regret. We were convenient, compatible on paper. But Jennifer, you deserved someone who looked at you the way I look at Elena. Someone who chose you first, always, without hesitation. That was never going to be me. The gun lowered as Jennifer's shoulders shook with sobs. Marcus moved quickly, disarming her with professional efficiency while two security personnel moved to restrain her. Victor didn't spare them a glance. His attention was entirely on Elena, crossing the distance between them in long strides and pulling her against his chest with desperate intensity. Are you insane? He demanded against her hair, his arms tight enough to make breathing difficult. Coming here alone? Walking into an obvious trap? Elena, you could have been killed. She said she'd kill you if I told anyone. Elena's voice was muffled against his shirt, her own arms wrapped around his waist, like she might never let go. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't lose you. Victor pulled back just enough to frame her face with his hands, his gray eyes burning with emotion. So you were willing to die for me? To walk into danger without backup or a plan because some deranged woman sent you a text message? Yes. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Because I'm done being afraid. Done letting fear make my choices. Done pretending I can live without you. Elena, I love you. The words tumbled out, uncensored and unguarded. I love you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to say it. I'm sorry I kept running, kept choosing fear over fighting for what I want. But I'm done running now. I'm choosing you, Victor. I'm choosing us. Whatever that costs, whatever we have to face, I'm choosing you. Victor's expression transformed, hope and love and fierce possessiveness all warring across his features. Your brother is going to lose his mind. I know. Your relationship with him might never be the same. I know. Everything is about to get infinitely more complicated. I know. Elena rose onto her toes, eliminating what little distance remained between them. But you were right about something. Some things are worth the cost. And this is worth everything. Victor's mouth claimed hers with bruising intensity, 9 years of restraint and 2 weeks of torture, and the last hour of fear all channeled into a kiss that left no room for doubt or misunderstanding. This was possession and promise and permanent all woven together, a declaration that what existed between them was no longer something they could or would hide. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena became aware of their audience. Marcus and the security team all carefully looking anywhere but at them, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing this intensely private moment. We should go, Victor said quietly, his forehead still pressed against Elena's. Lucas is at the warehouse. He's going to want to know what happened here. Are you going to tell him? Elena's heart raced at the prospect. About us? Yes. No hesitation, no uncertainty. I'm done lying to my best friend, done hiding the most important thing in my life like it's something to be ashamed of. He might never forgive us. I know. Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. But I'd rather have his anger than spend one more day pretending I don't love you. Are you ready for that? For the fallout? Elena thought about her brother, about the man who'd raised her and protected her, and asked only one thing in return. About the friendship Victor was about to jeopardize, about all the ways this confession could destroy the careful balance Lucas had built. Then she thought about 9 years of loneliness, about the suffocating weight of wanting something you couldn't have, about Victor's devastated expression when he told her to leave his quarters last night. I'm ready, she said firmly. Let's go tell him. The drive to the warehouse was tense and silent, Victor's hand never leaving Elena's as Marcus navigated Chicago's morning traffic. Jennifer sat in the back seat between two security guards, her earlier hysteria replaced by numb resignation. When they arrived, the scene was controlled chaos. Lucas's people securing the perimeter, while Martinez's men were being loaded into unmarked vans, clearly destined for interrogation rather than police custody. Lucas stood in the center of it all, directing operations with the kind of cold efficiency that had built his empire. He looked up as their car pulled in, his expression shifting from professional focus to personal concern when he saw Elena emerge. "You're supposed to be at the estate," he called out, already striding toward them. "What the hell are you—" He stopped abruptly as he registered Jennifer's presence, then Victor's protective stance beside Elena. "What's going on? What happened?" "We need to talk," Victor said quietly. "Somewhere private." Lucas's eyes narrowed, clearly sensing this was about more than just Jennifer's recapture. "Marcus, handle the cleanup here. Victor, Elena, with me." He led them to a small office inside the warehouse, closing the door and turning to face them with crossed arms and an expression that promised nothing good. "Talk," he commanded, "and someone better start explaining why my sister looks like she's been crying and you," he pointed at Victor, "look like you're about to confess to murder." Victor straightened his shoulders, his hand finding Elena's and holding tight. Jennifer lured Elena to the old factory on Riverside, sent her a message claiming I was in danger, that she had to come alone. "She what?" Lucas's voice dropped to something dangerous, his attention snapping to Elena. "You went to meet an armed, unstable woman without telling anyone. Are you out of your mind?" "Probably," Elena admitted. "But Lucas, she said she'd kill Victor if I told anyone. I couldn't risk it." "So you risked yourself instead." Her brother's fury was palpable now, radiating off him in waves. "Elena, you're not trained for field work. You have no combat experience. You could have been killed." "I know, and I'm sorry for worrying you, but I couldn't—" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't lose him, not without fighting for him first." The words hung in the air, their implication unmistakable. Lucas went very still, his gaze shifting between Elena and Victor with dawning comprehension. "Tell me I'm misunderstanding this. Tell me you're not saying what I think you're saying." "I love her." Victor's voice was steady, uncompromising. "I've loved her for 9 years, and I'm done pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena watched her brother's expression cycle through shock, denial, and finally settling on a fury so cold it made the January air seem tropical. "You've got to be kidding me." Lucas's voice was dangerously quiet. "After everything I asked from both of you, after the promises you made, you've been, what, carrying on behind my back?" "No," Elena said quickly. "Lucas, nothing happened until I came back. We kept our distance for 9 years, just like you asked. But I can't anymore. I can't keep choosing fear over happiness." "Happiness?" Lucas's laugh was bitter. "You call this happiness? Betraying my trust? Destroying the one rule I asked you both to follow?" "We didn't betray you," Victor countered, his voice hardening. "We fell in love. That's not betrayal. That's not something either of us chose or can control." "You could have controlled whether you acted on it." Lucas turned on his best friend with barely restrained violence. "You could have respected the boundary I set. You could have put our friendship, our partnership, above your—" He gestured between them with disgust. "Whatever this is." "This is love," Elena said firmly, stepping forward to stand between the two men. "Real, permanent, worth fighting for love. And I'm sorry it hurts you. I'm sorry it complicates things. But Lucas, I spent 9 years trying to kill this, trying to convince myself that distance would cure what I felt. It didn't. It only made it worse." "So what?" Her brother's eyes blazed. "You think because you tried to stay away that makes this okay? That I'm supposed to just accept that my sister and my best friend—" "Yes," Victor interrupted. "That's exactly what I'm asking you to accept. Because like it or not, this is happening. Elena and I are together. We're going to be together. And you can either accept that, or you can lose both of us." The ultimatum fell like a gauntlet, challenging Lucas to choose. For a long moment, Elena's brother stood frozen, rage and hurt warring across his features. Then he moved, fast and violent, his fist connecting with Victor's jaw with a crack that echoed through the small office. Victor's head snapped back, but he didn't retaliate. Didn't even raise his hands in defense. He just straightened slowly, blood trickling from his split lip, and met Lucas's furious gaze with steady acceptance. "Feel better?" Victor asked quietly. "No." Lucas's voice shook with emotion. "No, I don't feel better. I feel betrayed by the two people I trust most in this world. I feel like everything I built to keep my personal life separate from my business just got destroyed because neither of you could control yourselves." "Lucas, please," Elena started. Get out! Her brother turned away from them both, his shoulders rigid. Both of you, get out before I do something I'll regret. We need to talk about this, Victor pressed. Need to figure out how to move forward without destroying. I said get out! Lucas whirled back, and the raw pain in his expression made Elena's chest ache. I can't look at either of you right now. I can't have this conversation without saying things that can't be unsaid. So go. Leave me alone. Victor's hand tightened on Elena's, asking a silent question. She nodded, and together they left the office, leaving Lucas alone with his fury and his hurt and the shattered remains of trust. The drive back to the estate passed in heavy silence. When they finally arrived, Victor led Elena not to her quarters or his, but to the garden where they'd had their confrontation 2 weeks ago. Snow had started to fall, light flakes that caught in Elena's hair and melted against her cheeks. Victor pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as they stood in the exact spot where this had begun so many years ago. He'll come around, Victor said quietly, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Lucas loves you. He'll forgive us eventually. And if he doesn't? Elena looked up at him, needing honesty more than comfort. If we just destroyed your friendship for good? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his jaw still swollen from Lucas's punch. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Then we'll survive it together. Build something new from the ruins. Because, Elena, I meant what I said. I'd rather have his anger and your love than his friendship and a lifetime of pretending. Elena rose onto her toes and kissed him gently, carefully avoiding his split lip. I love you, she whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to be brave enough to choose you. You're choosing me now. Victor pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. That's all that matters. They stood together as snow continued to fall. Two people who'd fought against inevitability for 9 years finally surrendering to it. The cost had been high. Lucas's trust, the comfortable dynamic they'd all maintained, the illusion that love could be controlled or denied. But as Elena breathed in Victor's scent and felt his heartbeat steady against her cheek, she couldn't bring herself to regret the choice. Couldn't wish they'd continued hiding and pretending and slowly dying inside. This, standing in Victor's arms while snow fell and their future hung uncertain, was worth every consequence they'd face. Even if it meant losing everything else, they'd found each other. And that, Elena was finally beginning to understand, was the only thing that truly mattered. 3 days passed with no word from Lucas. 3 days of Elena and Victor existing in a strange limbo, together but uncertain, committed but aware that their happiness came at a price neither of them had fully calculated. They'd moved Elena's things into Victor's quarters without discussion, the decision feeling inevitable rather than planned. At night they held each other with desperate intensity, as if proximity could somehow shield them from the consequences gathering like storm clouds. During the day, Victor continued managing Lucas's operations, though every meeting felt weighted with tension. Lucas attended when necessary, his interactions with Victor coldly professional, his gaze sliding past Elena as if she'd ceased to exist entirely. It was worse than anger, worse than shouting or accusations or even violence. This calculated erasure, this deliberate denial of her presence, cut deeper than any words could have. On the fourth morning, Elena woke to find Victor already dressed, staring out the bedroom window at the snow-covered grounds with an expression that made her heart clench. He's selling his shares in the Northside development, Victor said quietly, not turning around. The project we've been working on together for 2 years. He's cutting me out. Elena sat up, pulling the sheets around herself. Can he do that? Legally? Yes. We structured the partnership to allow either of us an exit. Victor's jaw tightened. I just never thought he'd actually use it. Never thought he'd let personal feelings compromise business decisions. Maybe he needs time. Maybe if we just... Elena. Victor finally turned to face her, and the resignation in his eyes stole her breath. I don't think time is going to fix this. I think Lucas has made his choice, and that choice is to excise us both from his life as completely as possible. The words hung heavy in the morning air, speaking a truth Elena had been trying desperately to deny. She'd known choosing Victor would cost her relationship with her brother. She just hadn't expected the loss to feel quite so permanent, quite so final. I should talk to him, she said, already moving to get out of bed. If I can just explain, he doesn't want to hear it. Victor crossed to her, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hands in his. Marcus told me Lucas is considering sending you back to Seattle, setting you up with a position in one of his West Coast operations. Generous salary, full benefits, as far from Chicago as he can reasonably send you. Pain lanced through Elena's chest. He's trying to separate us. He's trying to undo what he sees as a mistake. Victor's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture both comforting and heartbreaking. In his mind, if he can just get you away from me, things will go back to how they were before. Our friendship will heal, the organization will stabilize, everything will be fine. Except I'm not leaving. Elena said it with absolute certainty, surprised by her own conviction. Not Chicago, not you. I spent 9 years running. I'm done. Victor's expression softened, love and pride mixing with concern. Even if it means permanent estrangement from Lucas? Even if he never forgives you? Elena thought about her brother, the man who'd sacrificed his youth to raise her, who'd built an empire partially to give her the life their parents would have wanted for her. She thought about family dinners and inside jokes and the safety of unconditional love. Then she thought about a life without Victor, about going back to Seattle and pretending the last month hadn't fundamentally changed her, about 9 more years, or 90, of loneliness and regret and wondering what might have been. Even then, she whispered, I choose you, Victor, even knowing what it costs. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with fierce protectiveness. We'll figure this out. Somehow, we'll find a way to make Lucas understand. But Elena wasn't sure understanding was possible, wasn't sure anything they said could bridge the gap between what Lucas needed and what they'd chosen. The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, as Elena was working in Victor's office, she'd stopped pretending to maintain her own workspace days ago. Marcus appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable. Ms. Ward, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. Elena looked up from the financial reports she'd been reviewing. Who? She wouldn't give her name, just said she's someone who understands what you're going through. Marcus shifted his weight. I can send her away if you want. Curiosity overrode caution. No, it's fine. Send her in. The woman who entered was elegantly dressed, probably in her late 50s, with graying hair and eyes that held both warmth and steel. Elena didn't recognize her, but something about her bearing suggested she was someone accustomed to authority. Elena Ward? The woman extended her hand. My name is Catherine Hale. I'm Victor's mother. Elena nearly dropped the report she was holding. Victor had mentioned his mother occasionally, always with respect and a certain wariness, but she lived in Boston and rarely visited Chicago. Elena had certainly never expected to meet her under these circumstances. Mrs. Hale. Elena shook the offered hand, acutely aware of how this looked, sitting in Victor's office, clearly comfortable in his space, her personal items visible on the desk. I didn't know you were in town. I wasn't, until Victor called me 3 days ago and told me he'd finally stopped being an idiot about the woman he's loved for 9 years. Catherine settled into the chair across from Elena's desk with the kind of grace that came from years of navigating complicated social situations. I came to meet the person who finally made my son willing to risk everything. Elena's cheeks heated. I'm not sure I'm worth the risk. That's not what I hear. Catherine's smile was knowing. Victor tells me you walked into a trap unarmed to save him, that you chose him even knowing it would cost you your brother's love. That sounds like someone worth any risk to me. Lucas might disagree. Lucas is young and hurt and reacting from a place of fear rather than wisdom. Catherine waved a dismissive hand. Which is why I'm here. To tell you something about your brother that might help you understand why he's taking this so hard. Elena leaned forward, desperate for any insight that might bridge the impossible distance. I'm listening. When Lucas was 23 years old, he fell in love with a woman named Sarah Mitchell. Catherine's expression turned sympathetic. Beautiful, intelligent, everything he thought he wanted. They were together for 6 months before Lucas discovered she was working for the Kozlov family, feeding them information about his operations, helping them undermine his business. Elena's breath caught. Lucas had never mentioned this, never spoken of any serious relationship before the organization had consumed his life entirely. The betrayal nearly destroyed him, Catherine continued. Not just the loss of someone he loved, but the realization that his personal feelings had compromised his judgment, had put his entire operation, and everyone who depended on him at risk. After that, he made a rule. Never mix business with personal attachments. Keep the people you love separate from the people you work with. And then I developed feelings for Victor. Understanding crystallized with sickening clarity. His best friend, his second in command. I violated the one boundary he created to protect himself. Exactly, Catherine nodded. In Lucas's mind, this isn't just about you and Victor falling in love. It's about history repeating itself. It's about personal feelings threatening to compromise everything he's built. It's about fear that he's going to lose both of you the same way he lost Sarah, through betrayal and complicated loyalties and the impossible intersection of love and business. Elena pressed her hands against her face, guilt and understanding washing over her in equal measure. So what do I do? How do I prove to him that Victor and I aren't Sarah, that we're not going to betray him or use our relationship to undermine him? You can't prove it. Catherine's voice was gentle, but firm. Not with words, not with promises. Lucas has heard all of that before. What he needs is time and space, and evidence through consistent action that you and Victor can maintain both your relationship and your loyalty to him. He won't give us that chance. He's trying to send me back to Seattle. Then don't go. Catherine stood, smoothing down her skirt with practiced elegance. Stay here. Keep showing up. Keep demonstrating that your love for Victor doesn't diminish your love for Lucas. Eventually, he'll see that this situation is different, that you're not Sarah. And if he doesn't? Elena's voice cracked. If he never forgives us? Catherine moved around the desk, placing a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. Then you'll have to accept that some people aren't capable of seeing past their own pain. But Elena, I've known Lucas since he was a teenager. I watched him raise you after your parents died. That man loves you more than he loves anyone in this world. He'll come around. It might take months. It might take years. But he'll come around. After Catherine left, Elena sat alone in the office, processing everything she'd learned. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Lucas's extreme reaction, his inability to even look at her, the way he was systematically removing Victor from his business ventures. This wasn't just anger, it was trauma response. Lucas was reacting to old wounds, old fears, old betrayals that had nothing to do with Elena and Victor's actual relationship. Understanding didn't fix anything, but it gave Elena something she desperately needed: hope. She found Victor in the gym, a space he retreated to when stress became unmanageable. He was attacking a heavy bag with controlled violence, each punch landing with precision that spoke to years of training. Your mother came to see me, Elena said from the doorway. Victor's hands stilled mid-punch. He turned slowly, surprise evident on his face. Catherine's here? In Chicago? Was here. I think she left already. Elena moved into the room, drawn to him despite the sweat and the raw energy radiating from his body. She told me about Sarah Mitchell. Victor's expression shuddered. Lucas told you about Sarah? Your mother did. Said it explained why he's reacting this way. It does. Victor unwrapped his hands with sharp, angry movements. Sarah destroyed Lucas's ability to trust that personal relationships and business loyalty can coexist. And we just confirmed his worst fear, that mixing the two leads to betrayal and complications. We didn't betray him. No. But in his mind, we betrayed his trust, violated the one boundary he asked us to maintain. Victor tossed the hand wraps aside, running both hands through his sweat-dampened hair. And the worst part is, he's not entirely wrong. I knew how he'd react. I knew what this would cost. And I chose you anyway. I'm not sorry you did. Elena crossed to him, pressing her palms against his chest. But Victor, we need to fix this. We need to find a way to prove to Lucas that we're not Sarah, that our relationship doesn't threaten his organization or our loyalty to him. How? The word came out defeated, exhausted. He won't talk to either of us, won't listen to explanations. He's already restructuring operations to minimize my involvement. Elena, I think he's planning to push me out entirely. The possibility hit Elena like a physical blow. He wouldn't. You've been partners for over a decade. You helped him build everything he has. And I just destroyed the trust that partnership was built on. Victor's hands came up to frame her face, his gray eyes dark with pain and resignation. Maybe Catherine's right. Maybe we just need to give him time. But, Elena, I need you to understand something. If it comes down to choosing between my position with Lucas and my relationship with you, I choose you. Every single time. That's not a choice you should have to make. But I will if necessary. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. I've lost you once already. I'm not losing you again, not for Lucas, not for the organization, not for anything. Elena kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. Love and gratitude and fierce determination to find a way through this that didn't require impossible sacrifices. When they finally broke apart, she knew what she had to do. I'm going to talk to Lucas, she said firmly. Force him to listen whether he wants to or not. Elena, no. She stepped back, her mind already made up. This has gone on long enough. I'm not letting my brother destroy himself and everything we all care about because he's too hurt to see past old trauma. He needs to hear the truth. And I'm the only one who can tell him in a way he might actually listen to. Victor looked like he wanted to argue, to protect her from the confrontation. Instead, he nodded slowly. Do you want me to come with you? No. This needs to be just Lucas and me, brother and sister. The way it was before business and complications and everything else got in the way, she found Lucas in his private study, the one place in the entire estate that was purely his, off limits to everyone except by explicit invitation. Elena didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and stood with her back against it until her brother was forced to acknowledge her presence. Lucas looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing, his expression going cold the moment he registered who dared intrude. Get out, he said flatly. No. Elena crossed her arms, channeling every ounce of stubbornness she possessed. Not until you listen to what I have to say. There's nothing you can say that will change. Sarah Mitchell wasn't me. Elena cut him off, watching shock ripple across his features. Whatever she did to you, whatever trust she destroyed, it has nothing to do with Victor and me. Lucas stood slowly, fury replacing shock. You have no right to bring her up, no right to... I have every right. Elena moved closer, refusing to be intimidated by his anger. Because you're punishing Victor and me for her sins. You're letting one woman's betrayal 9 years ago dictate how you respond to our relationship now. This isn't about Sarah. But Lucas's voice wavered slightly, uncertainty creeping through the anger. Isn't it? Elena pressed. Lucas, I know what happened. I know she was working for the Kozlovs. I know she used your feelings to compromise your organization. But I am not her. Victor is not her. What we have, it's not some conspiracy to betray you or undermine you. You're still mixing personal with business. Lucas's hands clenched into fists, still creating the exact vulnerability I've spent years protecting against. Maybe, Elena conceded the point. But you know what else I'm doing? I'm choosing happiness over fear. I'm refusing to let the possibility of pain prevent me from pursuing the only relationship that's ever felt real and permanent and worth fighting for. At what cost? Her brother's voice broke slightly. Elena, you're my sister, the most important person in my life. And Victor, he swallowed hard. He's been my best friend for over a decade. Losing both of you because you're not losing us. Elena closed the final distance between them, gripping her brother's arms with fierce intensity. Lucas, listen to me. Victor and I falling in love doesn't mean we stop loving you. Doesn't mean our loyalty to you diminishes. If anything, it means we're more invested in your success, your safety, your happiness. Because we're family now, all three of us. It's not that simple. It could be. Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd been fighting for days. If you'd just let it be, if you'd stop seeing threats where there's only love. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his features, anger and hurt and fear and something that looked almost like hope. You really love him? The question came out quiet, almost vulnerable. This isn't just, you're sure this is real? I've loved him for 9 years. Elena's voice steadied with certainty. I've tried to stop, tried to move on, tried to convince myself that distance would cure it. But Lucas, some loves don't fade. Some connections are too deep to sever. Victor is that for me. He's my person, my home, my future. And if I can't accept it, Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper. If I can't get past this feeling that everything I built is about to collapse because my best friend and my sister, then we'll give you time. Elena released his arms, stepping back slightly. As much time as you need. But Lucas, I'm not leaving Chicago. I'm not going back to Seattle to make this easier for you. I'm staying here with Victor, and I'm going to keep showing up, keep proving that we can make this work. until you finally believe it. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Lucas moved, pulling Elena into a fierce hug that drove the air from her lungs. I don't want to lose you, he murmured against her hair. Either of you. I'm terrified that history is going to repeat itself, that I'm going to wake up one day and find out this was all some elaborate betrayal. It's not. Elena hugged him back just as fiercely. I promise you, Lucas. This is real. This is permanent, and we're not going anywhere. They stood like that for a long moment, brother and sister, finding their way back to the bond that had sustained them through their parents' death and Lucas's rise to power and 9 years of Elena's self-imposed exile. When Lucas finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I'm still angry. I'm still not okay with how this happened. I know. And I need time. And space to process this without feeling like I'm being forced to choose sides. That's fair. But Elena, Lucas gripped her shoulders, holding her gaze with his own. If Victor ever hurts you, if he ever makes you regret this choice, I will destroy him, best friend or not, partner or not. He hurts you, I end him. Despite the gravity of the moment, Elena couldn't suppress a small smile. He knows. Trust me, Lucas. Victor is very aware of what you'll do if he screws this up. Good. Lucas released her, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded Elena painfully of Victor. Now get out. I have work to do. Lucas, I said I need time, Elena. I'm not ready to have family dinners and pretend everything's fine, but I'm also not sending you to Seattle. His expression softened fractionally. You're my sister. You're home. Just give me some space to adjust to this new reality. Elena nodded, accepting the boundary even as relief flooded through her. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. A crack in the wall Lucas had built between them. She left his study and went straight to Victor's quarters, finding him pacing the sitting room with barely controlled tension. How did it? He started. Elena launched herself into his arms, kissing him with all the joy and relief and hope she'd been containing. It's going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, Lucas is going to forgive us. We just have to give him time. Victor held her like she might disappear, his face pressed against her hair. Are you sure? Elena, I don't want you hoping for something that might never... I'm sure. She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. He hugged me, Victor. He told me I'm home. He's still angry and he needs space, but he's not cutting us out entirely. That's more than I dared hope for. The tension drained from Victor's shoulders, replaced by cautious optimism. So what happens now? Now? Elena smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. Now we wait. We prove to Lucas through consistent action that we can maintain both our relationship and our loyalty to him. We show him that this, us, doesn't threaten what the three of us built together. That could take months. Then we take months. Elena rose onto her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. I told you, Victor. I'm done running. I'm staying right here, with you, for as long as it takes. The weeks that followed were careful and complicated, a delicate dance of boundaries and small gestures toward reconciliation. Lucas remained professionally cordial with Victor, though their easy friendship was replaced by something more formal. He acknowledged Elena at meetings, even occasionally asked her opinion on matters, though he still avoided one-on-one conversations. But slowly, imperceptibly, the ice began to thaw. It started with Lucas asking Victor's opinion on a security matter, then actually listening to the advice instead of dismissing it. Continued with Lucas showing up to a family dinner Elena had carefully orchestrated, though he spent most of it talking to Catherine Hale, who'd apparently decided to extend her Chicago visit indefinitely. He needs a motherly presence, Catherine had explained to Elena over coffee one afternoon, someone who understands what he's going through but isn't personally invested in the outcome. I'm happy to be that for him. I think you're being that for all of us, Elena had replied, grateful beyond words for the older woman's intervention. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after Elena's conversation with Lucas in his study. Victor had been investigating a potential supplier issue. Nothing major, just some inconsistencies in shipment records that warranted closer examination. What he had uncovered was a mid-level manager skimming product, using fake invoices to cover the theft. Normally, Victor would have handled it himself, maybe consulted with Marcus on security implications. Instead, he walked straight into Lucas's office and laid out everything he'd found. "This is your call," Victor said, spreading the evidence across Lucas's desk. "Your organization. Your decision on how to handle it." Lucas looked up from the files, surprise evident in his expression. "You're asking my opinion? You have full authority to—" "I know what authority I have." Victor met his former best friend's gaze steadily. "But I also know that rebuilding trust means proving I'm not trying to operate independently, that I respect your leadership, that our partnership, our friendship, matters more to me than my ego." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. Then, slowly, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. Walk me through what you found." They spent the next 2 hours working through the problem together, the way they used to before everything had gotten complicated. And when the solution was decided, termination and full restitution, but no violence, Victor stood to leave with something approaching their old dynamic. "Victor?" Lucas's voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for bringing this to me instead of handling it alone. We're partners." Victor's voice was quiet but firm. "That still means something to me, even if everything else has changed." Everything else hasn't changed. Lucas's expression was complicated, but something in it had softened. "You're still my best friend, even when I want to punch you in the face for falling in love with my sister." Victor laughed, actually laughed, for what felt like the first time in weeks. "Fair enough. I'd probably feel the same if our positions were reversed. Don't test that theory." But Lucas was almost smiling. Almost. That night, when Elena came to bed, she found Victor standing at the window with an expression of cautious joy. "Lucas and I worked a case together today," he said without preamble. "Really worked it, like partners, like friends." Elena wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "I told you, time and consistency." He just needed to see that nothing fundamental had changed. "Everything fundamental has changed." Victor turned in her embrace, gathering her close. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're building something better than what we had before. Maybe we are." Spring came to Chicago with the kind of reluctant warmth that made everyone appreciate sunshine more than they had any right to. The estate gardens bloomed in waves of color, tulips giving way to roses, giving way to peonies that filled the air with their heavy sweetness. Elena walked through them in the late afternoon, enjoying the peace after a long day of budget reviews and strategic planning. She'd officially accepted a permanent position as Lucas's chief financial officer, a role that utilized her skills while keeping her integral to operations. "They're beautiful this year." Lucas's voice came from behind her, and Elena turned to find her brother approaching with his hands in his pockets and something tentative in his expression. "Catherine's been helping the groundskeeper plan the layouts," Elena replied, moving to sit on a familiar bench, the one where she and Victor had confronted each other all those months ago. "She says gardens are like relationships. They need consistent care and patience and willingness to prune what doesn't work." She would say that. Lucas settled beside her, following her gaze to where roses climbed a nearby trellis. "She's been reading me similar metaphors for weeks now. Is it working?" "Maybe." Her brother was quiet for a moment. "Elena, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." Elena's breath caught, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "I reacted from fear instead of trust," Lucas said quietly. "Let old trauma dictate how I responded to your relationship with Victor. Punished you both for someone else's sins. That wasn't fair, it wasn't right, and I'm sorry. Lucas, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I've been watching you two over the past couple months, seeing how you work together, how you support each other without compromising your loyalty to the organization or to me. And I've realized something." "What's that?" "You're better together than you ever were apart." Lucas turned to face her fully. "Victor is more grounded when you're around, more careful, more strategic. And you're braver, more willing to take risks and fight for what you want. You make each other better. And I was too scared to see that." Tears blurred Elena's vision. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know." Lucas pulled her into a sideways hug. "And I'm sorry I made you choose between us. That I couldn't be happy for you right away. That I let you think I might never forgive you." "So you do? Forgive us?" There's nothing to forgive. Lucas's voice was firm. You fell in love. That's not a crime. It's not a betrayal. It's just life. Complicated, messy, beautiful life. Elena pressed her face against her brother's shoulder, crying in earnest now. I've missed you, missed this. Missed having my brother instead of just a boss who tolerates my presence. I've missed you too. Lucas kissed the top of her head. And Elena, for what it's worth, if you had to fall in love with someone in my organization, I'm glad it was Victor. He's a good man. He'll take care of you. I don't need taking care of. Elena pulled back, wiping at her tears. We take care of each other. That's what partnership means. Fair point. Lucas stood, offering her his hand. Come on. Dinner's in an hour, and Catherine threatened to disown all of us if we're late to her farewell meal. She's leaving? Disappointment colored Elena's voice. Catherine had become an unexpected anchor these past months, offering wisdom and perspective when everything felt overwhelming. Going back to Boston tomorrow. Lucas helped Elena to her feet. But she'll visit regularly. She's already planned her next trip for June. They walked back toward the main house together, brother and sister, their bond strengthened rather than broken by everything they'd survived. As they approached the terrace, Elena saw Victor waiting by the doors, his expression softening when he saw them together. About time, he called out. Catherine's been threatening to start without us. Lucas surprised everyone by crossing to Victor and extending his hand. Thank you for taking care of my sister, for being patient with me while I worked through my issues, for being the kind of man who deserves her. Victor gripped Lucas's hand firmly, emotion flickering across his features. Thank you for trusting us, for giving us the chance to prove this could work. Just don't make me regret it. But Lucas was smiling, the threat tempered with affection. Dinner was exactly what Elena had been craving, loud and chaotic and full of laughter, the four of them trading stories and arguments and comfortable silences that spoke to growing ease. Catherine presided over it all with maternal satisfaction, clearly pleased by the family she'd helped reassemble. After dessert, as they lingered over coffee, Lucas raised his glass in an unexpected toast. To new beginnings, he said, his gaze encompassing all of them. To family, chosen, and blood. To forgiveness. To second chances. And to love, even when it comes in the most complicated possible packages. They clinked glasses, the gesture feeling like benediction and celebration all woven together. Later that night, as Elena and Victor lay tangled together in bed, she traced the fading bruise on his jaw, the remnant of Lucas's punch all those weeks ago. I can't believe we made it through, she whispered. Did you doubt we would? Victor's fingers threaded through her hair, his touch achingly tender. Sometimes, when Lucas was at his most distant, when I thought I might have to choose between you and him after all. What would you have chosen? Elena met his gaze, seeing her whole future reflected in those gray eyes. You. I would have chosen you, every time. I know. Victor pulled her closer. And that's exactly what convinced Lucas to forgive us. Not our promises or our explanations. The fact that you were willing to sacrifice your relationship with him rather than give up what we have. That kind of commitment can't be faked. He saw that. Eventually. I'm glad eventually came sooner rather than later. Me too. Victor kissed her softly. Though I would have waited, however long it took. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they'd survived the worst. That whatever challenges came next, they'd face them together. Summer arrived with Chicago heat and the kind of thunderstorms that lit up the sky like fireworks. Elena and Victor had settled into a rhythm, working alongside Lucas during the day, spending evenings in the garden or exploring the city, nights discovering new depths to the connection they'd denied for too long. On a July evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold, Victor led Elena back to the garden gazebo where everything had truly begun. You know what happened here 9 years ago, he said, pulling her close. Right here, under these same stars. I almost kissed you for the first time. You did kiss me, Elena corrected with a smile. Once, very briefly, before Lucas called and reality intruded. Before you ran away to Seattle, Victor's arms tightened around her waist. Before we spent 9 years pretending we could live without each other. What's your point? My point? Victor released her just long enough to drop to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Is that I'm done with almosts. Done with hesitation. Done with letting fear or Lucas's feelings or anything else stop me from claiming what I want. Elena's breath stopped entirely as Victor opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the fading sunlight and shattered it into rainbows. "Elena Ward," he said, his voice steady, despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you stay here in Chicago, build a life with me, deal with your overprotective brother and my meddling mother and all the complications that come with loving someone in this world?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, without doubt. Yes to all of it. To you, to us, to forever. Victor slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her with all the passion and promise and permanence she'd ever dreamed of. When they finally broke apart, Elena was laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by the sheer rightness of this moment. "Lucas is going to lose his mind," she said between kisses. "Lucas already knows." Victor grinned. "I asked his permission 3 days ago." "You what?" "I asked his permission. Or more accurately, I told him I was going to propose and gave him the chance to object." Victor's expression turned serious. "He said yes, said he'd be honored to have me as his brother-in-law, said our wedding better be in Chicago because he's not traveling to Seattle for it." Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "He really said that? He really said that. And then he threatened to break both my legs if I ever make you cry for the wrong reasons." Elena laughed, the sound full of joy and relief and love so fierce it felt like it might consume her. "I love you. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the last 5 minutes." Victor pulled her close again. "Feel free to mention it as often as you like." They stood together as the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, exactly where they'd almost begun 9 years ago. But this time, there would be no interruptions. No running, no fear or doubt or denial. This time, they were choosing each other, permanently, irrevocably. The wedding took place 6 months later in the estate gardens, despite the January cold. Catherine had insisted that was plenty of time to plan properly, and Elena had discovered that arguing with her future mother-in-law was an exercise in futility. Lucas walked Elena down the aisle with pride evident in every step, giving her away with genuine happiness rather than resignation. "Take care of her," he said to Victor, his voice carrying just far enough for Elena to hear. "With my life," Victor replied solemnly. "Good, because I wasn't kidding about the broken legs thing." Then Lucas stepped back, and Elena was standing beside Victor beneath an arch of white roses and winter greenery, promising forever to the only man she'd ever loved. The ceremony was simple but elegant, attended by a carefully curated mix of legitimate business associates and the key members of Lucas's organization who'd earned the right to witness this intensely personal moment. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, Victor kissed Elena with the kind of intensity that made several guests clear their throats meaningfully. Elena didn't care. After 9 years of denial and weeks of fighting for their right to be together, she was going to savor every moment of this hard-won happiness. The reception stretched into the early morning hours, full of dancing and champagne and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Lucas gave a speech that had Elena crying and laughing simultaneously, talking about the little sister who'd always been too brave for her own good, and the best friend who'd finally gotten the sense to recognize what had been in front of him all along. "I won't say it was easy," Lucas concluded, raising his glass, "accepting that my sister and my best friend were in love. But watching them together these past months, seeing how they've built something real and lasting despite all the obstacles, including my stubbornness, I've learned something important. Love isn't a threat to loyalty, it's the foundation of it. To Victor and Elena, may they be as happy together as they deserve." The crowd erupted in applause, and Elena crossed to her brother, hugging him fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding, for forgiving us, for being here. Where else would I be?" Lucas hugged her back just as tightly. "You're my sister, he's my best friend, and now your family in every possible way. I wouldn't miss this for anything." As midnight approached and guests began trickling away, Elena found herself in the garden again. Her garden now, hers and Victor's, the place where their story had begun and would continue. "Happy?" Victor appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Deliriously." Elena leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and the weight of his wedding band against her own. Though I still can't believe we're actually here, actually married, after everything. Believe it. Victor turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with the tenderness that had become so familiar. You're mine now, permanently. No more running, no more denial, no more letting fear make our decisions. No more, almost, Elena agreed, rising onto her toes to kiss him. Just us, together. Finally. They swayed together in the winter darkness, dancing to music only they could hear, two people who'd fought against inevitability for 9 years before finally surrendering to it. Above them, stars blazed in the clear January sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first almost kiss, their garden confrontation, Victor's proposal. Now they bore witness to something new, a beginning rather than an ending, a choice rather than a surrender, a love that had survived denial and distance and every obstacle thrown in its path. Elena Ward, Elena Hale now, pressed closer to her husband and smiled against his shoulder. 9 years ago, she'd run from this man and this feeling, convinced that distance would cure what she was feeling. She'd been wrong about so many things back then. But now, standing in Victor's arms with her brother's blessing and her whole future stretching out before her like a gift, Elena finally understood what she should have known all along. Some loves are worth any cost. Some connections are too deep to sever. Some people are worth fighting for, even when, especially when, the fight seems impossible. Victor Hale had been her choice, her risk, her reward. And as they danced together under the winter stars, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she would make that choice again, every single day, for the rest of their lives. The waiting was over. The running had ended. Home, at last, was exactly where she belonged, in Victor's arms, in Lucas's life, in the complicated, beautiful, hard-won happiness they'd all built together. And it was perfect.